Hey, thank you for attending this evening. I now call the April 21st board meeting of the Lane Community College Board of Education meeting to order. In recognition of Governor Kate Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives executive order to combat the spread of COVID-19, this meeting is being held remotely. I'd like to remind board members and staff to please keep themselves muted and to use the hand raise feature when you would like to speak. Board members are also asked to have their video turned on so you're visible to the viewing public throughout the board meeting. Can you please go ahead and take the roll call, Donna?
Sure. Holly Johnson.
Present.
Angela Van Kraus.
Present.
Mike Eister.
Here.
Matt Keating.
Here.
Chelsea Jennings.
Here.
Rosie Pryor.
Here.
And Lisa Fragola.
Present. Thank you. So we will begin our evening's meeting with a reading of a land recognition, and tonight our board member Angela Van Kraus will read that for us.
Thank you. We start our meeting with the acknowledgement that the land that we are on is the traditional homeland of the Kalapuya people. The Kalapuya were stewards of this very land for over 14,000 years before their traditional way of life was forever disrupted and destroyed. We start our meeting with humility and reverence for the original inhabitants, the Kalapuya.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the president's report. Dr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair Fragola. Welcome everyone to the April board meeting. During the month of April, we celebrate community colleges and we recognize the work of our colleges. This is a time to highlight our board, our budget committees, our bond oversight committees, advisory committees, our faculty, our classified staff, our managers, and all of our partners in this community who are supporting us. April is also Volunteer Appreciation Week, so I wish to thank all the volunteers that support this college. I'd especially like to offer thanks to our foundation and its 70 community volunteers who've read and scored dozens of scholarship applications this month, just in time for fall registration, in addition to their regular fundraising efforts. I'd like to thank all the volunteers who work the vaccine clinics, Dawn, Barth, Laura Green, so many of our employees. They continue to volunteer their time at these clinics. And this time of year, so many of our students are taking home scholarships and awards. Congratulations to one of our music students, Xander Furrow, who placed in the 2021 Jack Stone Award for Community Colleges. The link is in my written report. It's called Cave of Hollows. April's been a time to talk about returning to campus. Last September, the TRIO STEM reopened its on-campus labs, and they've been providing in-person tutoring to supplement online tutoring throughout this pandemic. The labs have been open 5 days a week, and utilizations increased by about 160%. We anticipate the completion rates for our TRIO students will continue to outperform the rest of the college. We've also had a great reopening story with our Child and Family Center. The center continues to serve about 80 children. Following all strict COVID health and safety protocols, they've had no incidences of COVID. Kudos to the Child and Family Education Manager, Cheryl Henderson, and all of our employees. So there's 2 town halls this week, and we're going to be discussing more about how to reopen. There'll be a campus-wide town hall on Friday and an all faculty town hall on Thursday. These town halls are helping us be more fully prepared for the fall. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. And I'd also like to take a moment to recognize all of the volunteers in the foundation, as well as all of our employees here at the college who have been volunteering. So important. We'll move on to statements from the audience, our public comment period. The board will not respond directly to issues raised by the audience, but will refer those issues to the president for appropriate action. However, we do appreciate attendees' participation in LCC board meetings and the willingness of our stakeholders to address the board. To participate in public comment, you should go to the Board of Education website and follow the link to board docs and the sign up link, or you can go to the Lane website and click the board meeting feature posted at the bottom of the page before each board meeting under what's happening. You'll enter the board meeting as an attendee after you get the link, and then will be moved over to the meeting as a participant when it is your turn to speak. The meeting host will mute your speaker, and you may also start your video if you choose. In an effort to increase access as well as participation, we've made some changes to the manner in which we're doing public comment. Please remember to keep your comments to the 3 minutes allotted to each speaker. And we will begin tonight with Claudia Rumalo. And please correct me if I didn't get that pronunciation correct, Claudia.
It looks like Claudia has not joined us yet, so maybe we could come back to her.
Okay, and so let's go on to Linnea Vos. Welcome, Linnea. So you should get a message on your screen to unmute, and you can also start your video. There you go.
I am trying to just attend. I wasn't trying to speak, but I'm a new faculty, and I'm wondering what the whole cleaning protocols and all that fun stuff is going to be, since we're safety wise, especially if we're going backwards as a county. Yes, I'd love to go back, but safely. So I'm just trying to keep informed what the plan is.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Bonnie Samoa from the Lane Dance Program. Welcome, Bonnie.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here and all the important work that you do. I wanted to share just very briefly one of our students who actually is a high school student attending dance class at LCC. Beautiful Black woman, amazing dancer. Okay, ready for this? She got a scholarship for $92,000 to go to a dance college in I think it's Tennessee. $92,000, something a dancer can probably, most of us would never do. So anyway, I'm so excited for her. Her name is Cameron Dorsey, beautiful dancer. She participated in our last project. I'm going to read this. It's very important. I'll get it out. Based on scientific research presented by leading infectious disease specialists and dance faculty across the country, the LCC dance program crafted and implemented a dance safety protocol for teaching class face-to-face fall, winter, and spring terms this year. We also produced 2 live stream performance events. Our studio is large enough to use 12-foot squares versus the 6 feet that some colleges and universities were using. We have doors that open and fans that turn on. We have a strict protocol about masks and hand sanitization. We're using the fancy D10s in the classroom that are working great for us. And we're working really hard under incredible stress trying to manage 2 different platforms, Zoom and Live, while masked. On Thursday, week 2 of this term, at our first face-to-face meeting, 2 hours after class, a student emailed me and told me that she was tested positive for COVID-19. She underwent mandatory testing in order to participate in an athletic event that weekend. She was asymptomatic. This was a first for me. I have several students in virtual classes that informed me that they were COVID positive, but I hadn't had them in the classroom. I realized I didn't know what the next steps were. I had a brief call with Dean Ellen Osterkamp, who thought I would likely need to get tested. She wasn't quite sure and put me towards Don Barth, who wanted to know the names of the students and their L numbers, which I gave her. And then I waited and I wondered, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to let the students know? Who's going to let the students know? When will they let the students know? At 9 o'clock that evening, 9:30 that evening, I had been checking email regularly because I was concerned. I felt if I was supposed to do something, I wanted to do it in a timely way. And Dawn said that she was waiting to hear what all LCPH was doing, what the Lane County Public Health was doing. I went to bed feeling really unsettled. The next day, I sent an email to find out if students had been notified, and Dawn had replied me that she had spoken with the Dr. Guzman at LCPH, and it was not their policy to notify students that were not at risk. Because we had followed the protocol, they were not considered at risk. I understand that completely right now. I get that. That makes sense to me. Because of HIPAA, we need to be really careful about letting students know. Because
That is your time, Bonnie. Could you finish up that last sentence, please?
yeah, this makes sense to me now. We're all working really hard. The college needs to send out regular and coherent information about how these situations are going to be handled, both from the student side, the administration side, and the faculty side. I'm going to
Okay,
say,
great. Thank you very much. That is your time. Thank you.
we need to let students know that they could be asymptomatic.
Thank you for your comments tonight.
Mhm.
So next speaking, we have Christina Howard.
Hello, thanks for letting me join today. I'm here to speak about the content of the program Sustainability Executive Summary Report. And there's a statement in that report that says that a recommendation to evaluate the benefit of ALS courses and faculty within the College and Career Foundations divisions. And I'm here to say that I feel it's wholly inappropriate for the college to include public statements that recommend faculty evaluation as a recommendation for program sustainability. While the college has a right and a responsibility to evaluate programs and services, statements calling for faculty evaluation target individuals, defaming their work and standing in the college and our community. I stand in solidarity with the full-time and part-time faculty who teach in the ALS program and who are deserving of respect and care. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Up next, we have Adrienne Mitchell with LCCEA.
Good evening, Board of Education members. I'm speaking this evening about two topics. First, I would like to express appreciation for the addition of the action item to tonight's agenda to address proposed budget changes for FY22. You heard from all of the elected officers of the LCCEA and the LCCEF about the critical need for board engagement in decision-making about the budget. We believe this not only aligns with Oregon revised statutes, which outline the authority of community college boards, but also numerous board policies, and is very much in the public interest. It is understandable that budgeting is challenging this year due to the ever-changing landscape of the pandemic, and we look forward to provision of information and much more detailed accounting for proposed changes for your review in future years. Thank you for your attention to this matter in the public interest and for the quick work of the administration, especially Zach, to add this item for your consideration. Second, I would like to reiterate the request that the board as a body consider the reorganization of the IR department as part of your decision-making regarding changes for next year, in accordance with board policies 30 and 510, among others. This reorganization is a reduction in service and a substantive change in institutional research that will result in the retrenchment of one contracted faculty member. Absent inclusion of this item as part of the overall budgetary framework adoption, this would be the first faculty retrenchment in the history of Lane Community College that comes about without a vote of the Board of Education. As many of you know, there have been so many layoffs over the years, especially since 2002, when property tax caps and disinvestment in higher education have began to take their toll. Layoffs have included both instructional and non-instructional faculty and have only taken place through a board decision. For clarity, these have not been line item votes, but rather votes that incorporate all proposed changes for the next year, including reductions, eliminations, reorganizations, and investments. I believe this is far more a matter of public concern and in the public interest than it is specifically a labor concern. As much as it is a matter of policy, it is also a matter of principle. Public oversight does matter. As a member of both the campus community and community at large, I respectfully request that you include this item as part of your overall review of proposed changes for a vote. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. And my apologies for the acronym. LCCEA is the Lane Community College Education Association that represents our faculty. Next speaking is Lee Immonen, LCC Visual Arts and Lane Community College Education Association Board.
Thank you for having me here this evening. Tonight I'll be reading a statement on behalf of faculty member Steve McQuitty. Dear members of the Lane Community College Board of Education, my name is Steve McQuitty, and I have taught in academic learning skills since 2002. I'm sorry I cannot be here in person to call your attention to a matter regarding communication at Lane and its effects. On April 6th, 2021, I received an email telling me about a public document that stated our department would undergo a sustainability review during the 2021-22 academic year, with one possible outcome being retrenchment of full-time faculty. We had been asking about this for most of the past year, even the past few years. We had been told repeatedly that no decisions had been made. We knew that other departments had been notified of possible actions and that meetings had taken place. No meetings or notification had involved ALS. When I received the email, I asked 3 questions. Who wrote the section on ALS? 2, who was consulted regarding the data and text? 3, when was this information made available and to whom? I never received answers to these questions. I hope that you will direct the current administration to honor the college policy of fostering an environment of respect, fairness, honesty, and openness. Respectfully, Steve McQuitty, Instructor, Academic Learning Skills. Thank you.
Thank you. So that completes all of the names that I have in my list, but since we are changing our process a little bit, I am going to see if any attendees are still here to give public comment, and you could indicate that now by raising your hand. Okay, great. Thank you. So that completes our public comments. Thank you very much for your participation tonight. I'm going to move us on to our consent agenda, which I had to scroll down in board docs for because it's a long one. So are there any items in the consent agenda that a board member would like to pull? Angela Van Kraus?
Thank you. I'd like to pull G and F and G, sorry.
Could you say the full name of the, so we make sure we get them?
F is people admin software, and G is planning and assessment software.
Okay. Great. So we'll pull people admin software and planning and assessment software. Is there anything else that somebody would like to pull? Matt Keating?
Thanks, Chair Fragala. And just FYI, I'm not seeing a place to raise a hand tonight.
Okay.
But I would like to pull the minutes BP3 proposed BP 2360, please.
So LOCCA BP 2360 minutes. Okay,
Correct.
so we'll pull that.
And if I could comment on if would I don't.
We're going to
love
pass
if it was.
it.
If the resolution was passed in the consent agenda, but I'd like to make a comment on it at some point, please.
Okay. So you don't want to pull it though. Can you make that comment in your board comments at the end of the meeting?
Yes, happily.
Great. Perfect. So is there anything else that someone would like to pull from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, then I'll entertain a motion to pass the consent agenda.
So move.
Second,
Second,
thank you. Donna, can you call the roll? The motion in front of us is to approve the consent agenda.
Sure. Holly Johnson,
Yay.
Angela Van Kraus,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Matt Keating,
aye.
Chelsea Jennings,
Aye.
Rosie Pryor,
Aye.
Lisa Fragala.
Aye. Okay, so we have approved the consent agenda except for those 3 items. And I'm going to go first to Angela, and we'll start with the people admin software and then go next into the planning and assessment software.
Is this a moment I should speak?
Yes, this is the moment.
Okay. I asked some questions in advance about this. My internet is incredibly slow tonight. I apologize. I'm trying to actually get to the responses to those questions. Because it's an expenditure, I requested that we pull these just to make sure that we sort of highlight the fact that we are approving expenditures. And so I also wanted to sort of share in the public setting the information, the additional information that I received about these items. So let me find them. So these expenditures, as I understand it, are new, and the people admin acquisition was included in the planning, projection, and balancing framework. General fund capital outlay budget will be reallocated to fund year 1 of the watermark planning and assessment software. After year 1, the expense will be included in the information technology general fund mandatories budget. These are not being paid for with bond funds. Is there anything else that would be helpful to add from the administration perspective?
I see Marge shaking her head no. Is there any input from other staff? It is also my understanding that we cannot use bond dollars for software, but I appreciated that information. Thank you. Angela, did you have anything else?
I don't think so. Is it acceptable to move that we approve them both at once, or does it require 2 motions?
Absolutely. If you would like to make that motion, we can move those forward.
Okay. I move approval of the people admin software and planning and assessment software proposals.
Do I have a second? Second by Rosie Pryor. So we're approving both F and G, the people admin software, planning and assessment software is the motion in front of us. Donna, can you call the roll, please?
Holly Johnson,
Yay.
Angela Van Kraus,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Matt Keating.
Aye.
Chelsea Jennings,
Aye.
Rosie Pryor,
Aye.
Lisa Fragala.
Aye. Okay, we'll move on to OCCA BP 2360 regarding minutes. Matt Keating.
Thanks, Chair Fragala. And thanks to legal counsel, Michael Blade and Dr. Hamilton for sending this to me over the weekend. And rather than tweaking it and in careful consideration, it feels a little superfluous based on the fact that ORS determines that we need to take minutes, and B, something that might fall well into the operating agreement. And so rather than codifying elements like the substance of, or quote, the substance of any discussion of any matter be included, I think it would be in the institution's best interest if all the elements that are proposed pursuant to Oregon law are discussed and cemented in the operating agreement. It just seems a little little curious that we would a little not curious, but seems unneeded or unnecessary, and as I said, superfluous to have a policy that echoes and then expands upon ORS. So my motion, Madam Chair, if I may, is to, if we need, or my suggestion, if we absolutely need to have a board policy around minutes, which I don't think we do because of the aforementioned reasons, that if we do, it's just sentence E, and then we can reference the operating agreement for any further details.
Okay, I see Rosie Pryor has her hand raised.
Just a question for legal counsel. I cannot recall when we reviewed this policy and discussed it in our work session, if this was a legally required policy or a legally advised policy. Can we get our memory refreshed about that?
It's legally advised, not legally required.
Okay, thanks.
So we don't have a motion at this point. We have a suggestion or a recommendation from a board colleague. Are there any other comments regarding this?
Lisa, I also don't have a hand raise feature that I can find.
All right, just wave at me.
All right. So, Michael, you said legally advised. Can you elaborate a little bit more? I mean, is there a reason why it wouldn't make sense for this to be part of an operating procedure as opposed to a board policy?
I suspect that when the OCC, I don't know this for a fact, I'm guessing here, when OCCA was drafting all their policies, they probably weren't contemplating operating procedures for a board. I don't know that that's a common thing for community college boards to have in Oregon. It may be. I came from Klamath. I can tell you they don't have one. At least they didn't while I was there, or prior to me being there. So my guess is because they weren't contemplating operating procedures, they began, because as Trustee Keating said, it is codified in ORS. They probably thought we better put this in our set of board policies. So I don't see any reason why you couldn't move it to an operating procedure, make it an operating procedure. But that's my guess as to why it was there.
Okay, thank you. Angela?
In the review that we did of this policy, I felt pretty good about it as a policy, and I sort of feel that a lot of our policies are expansions of ORS or based in ORS. So I don't have any concerns about approving this as a policy as written.
Okay, I'm gonna make a suggestion, and I do see your hand is raised, Rosie. So I will acknowledge that there were two policies from our work session regarding public participation and guest speakers that you're not seeing in the consent agenda because we are currently working on them, the chair and the vice chair in collaboration with legal counsel, and planning to bring them to the next work session. So we could do the same thing with this one. We could work on it some more and bring it back to the work session for a further discussion. That would mean we would use a motion to delay a decision. Rosie, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks. My suggestion would be, I think I have a somewhat similar position to Angela. I'm fine with this as a board policy. And I'm not particularly interested in spending too much more time on this particular topic, given the volume of board policies that we have ahead of us to review. So my inclination would be to just go ahead and approve this policy tonight. If we want to continue to work on it in the future and turn it into an operating procedure, we always have the option to do that. But I agree with Angela. There are a lot of board policies that are amplifications of ORS. And so, my preference would be to just go ahead and approve this policy and deal with it as we're inclined to spend time on it.
Okay, Angela, is that an old hand or did you raise your hand? Oh, There we go. That's what my students call it, is an old hand. Matt, I saw your hand raised.
Thank you. And there are other elements that I think would be more appropriate to discuss in an operating procedure conversation. But since we're here, the line that says, if requested, the written minutes shall be made available in appropriate alternative formats so as to be accessible to persons with a disability. The recording of the meeting is a public record, and that, frankly, the way I interpret ORS, should be available to anyone who requests the recording. And so the way this is worded is not quite accurate. Hence why I want to workshop it or wordsmith it a bit more and park it in that in the operating procedure. I'll be voting against passing it tonight because I think it needs a lot of work. And just because we've seen it and it references ORS doesn't necessarily mean it's worthy of being forwarded on and passed tonight. I encourage colleagues to either vote this down and or move it to an operating procedure, please.
Okay, Michael Blade.
Just to be clear, the recording of the meeting is a public record until the minutes are officially passed in the consent agenda of the next meeting. At that point, we can get rid of the recording. Once that happens, the minutes can stand alone. Doesn't mean we have to. Doesn't mean that's what we're going to do. I'm just saying legally we can then dispose of the recording of the meeting, and the minutes stand as the documentation of the meeting.
Matt?
Madam Chair, can I illustrate how fundamentally opposed I am to that proposal?
So I hear that you are opposed to that proposal, and I heard that is also not currently what we are doing. I don't think we need an illustration right now. And I see Holly's hand.
I'll pass. I had, when I heard that we'll get rid of the recording, that kind of caused a little concern, but I'll pass in my comment.
Okay, thank you, Holly. So it is my understanding that we are not and have not disposed of the recordings after any meetings, based on what Michael Blade said, that he's just clarifying what is legally operable. And so I'm hearing concerns expressed, and I would like to suggest that we defer our decision on this and allow it to be worked on a little bit more. And so I would need a motion to do that. We're not tabling, we are deferring the decision.
I move that we defer for further work.
Second.
Okay, and Michael Blade, that's just a 50% majority vote to defer, right?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, Donna, can you call the roll, please?
Holly Johnson,
Aye.
Angela Van Kraus,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Matt Keating,
Aye.
Chelsea Jennings,
Aye.
Rosie Pryor,
Aye.
Lisa Fragala.
Aye. Okay, thank you. And I apologize for not repeating what the motion was, but we did just defer that decision, and it'll give us some more time to work on it. All right, so that finishes up our consent agenda. I am going to move us on to action items. Our first action item is regarding the auditor RFP. Could somebody remind me what RFP means? March?
Request for proposals.
Thank you. So we have an auditor request for proposals. I feel like RFP is just a whole word in my brain. But I wanted to clarify that for anyone. And we do have a recommended action that in accordance with the proposal documents, Kenneth Coons and Company, Certified Public Accountants of Salem, Oregon, be awarded the contract. So I see Angela's hand. Oh, I'm sorry, we have a presentation by Mr. Holmes.
I was just raising my hand to give Michael attention because he was trying to get something said on the last item.
Okay, thank you. Michael, did you have something else?
I just wanted to point out that what you were searching for there is to propose postpone to a certain time. That the suggestion you were making, yes, that got voted on. That's
Yeah.
what it's officially called. So
Great, thank you. I think deferred communicates the same thing, but thank you. Okay, Greg, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Dr. Hamilton and Board of Education. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have. We put a lengthy narrative in there, and I know there's been questions prior to the board meeting. But I'm here to answer any questions if you have.
Okay, great, thank you. Rosie Pryor.
Thank you. I posed a question and I failed to share it with the balance of the board about the Board of Education is dedicated to the implementation of its community benefits agreement. And so I am interested to learn to what degree points were allocated, or if they were at all, for a company being local. Recall that businesses that reside in Lane County are paying the property taxes that support Lane Community Colleges. Businesses outside of Lane County, not so much. So I'm interested to know more about that in this process of evaluation and why the low bidder and local bidder was not the preferred candidate.
So you bet. Thank you, Rosie. So we evaluated, we had waiting based on 15 criteria.
Greg, I'm sorry to
local, use local reference, understanding on.
Greg, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're coming through slurred. I think you have a slow feed. Would you want to try turning your camera off and seeing if that helps?
Thank you, Rosie. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Gotcha. I have a lot of documents open in case you ask questions. But yes, Rosie, we used 15 criteria and we based it on GFOA, or that's the Government Finance Officers Association's best practices. Fees was part of this. Fee was part of the scoring mechanism, and you see that. But for your question about local preferences on Lane County, we did not add points, as we were counseled that you can't give points for Lane County. You can do it for the state of Oregon. So, but we do. We reached out. Purchasing reached out to the 66 firms that were in the state of Oregon. The reason why we did not go with, the reason why the low bidders came out of how they were, Moss Adams, very strong firm, but they would not they interpret the accounting rules that they cannot create the GASB trial balance, which is the Governmental Accounting Standard Board's journal entries and the financials and the notes of the financials. They want staff to do that. And then in my reference check with Umpqua Community College, they have one qualified person, which is their CFO, that could do the work that Moss wants them to do. However, they recommend that needed two folks that can do those GASB entries with one reviewing, and Umpqua is having a hard time recruiting. That out of the 5 people that we're evaluating, we all estimate roughly in between 173 hours to 200 hours of additional work that would have been additional staff work. And then we would have to find a qualified CPA to do that work. And so that's why Moss Adams scored where they're at. A very professional firm, strong candidates. And then Price Funk is out of Bend. They do Central Oregon Community College and has been doing that for the last 3 years. but that's their only higher ed. And so Ken Coons beat them on the experience with their 9 community colleges that they have done and are doing currently. And so out of the 5 people scoring, we all scored them how you see them independently. We scored Ken, Moss, and Price that way. So
that information is very, very helpful. And given the board's commitments to its community benefits agreement, perhaps going forward, even a paragraph to that effect might be useful in the report to the board and as a result to the public, so that in a situation like this where it might seem that we're not honoring our agreements, there is some background information for the general public about how that decision or the recommendation is arrived at. So thanks for that information.
you bet. Thank you.
Matt Keating?
Thank you, Chair. Greg, if my notes are correct, Kenneth Coons has been our auditor since 2003, correct?
They've actually they've been our auditor since let's see, I want to get the exact date. 1997.
Okay,
through
so
20.
thank you. So earlier, so the research indicates that the European Union requires companies to put up for tender and potentially change their auditor every 10 years. And there's growing thirst in the United States for similar regulation. I remember asking about that when Kenneth Coons visited us. I'm somewhat satisfied with the answer about rotating who actually does the audit, but I'll be voting against this recommendation tonight because having the same auditor for an institution of higher education for more than 2 decades, it may be high time for a change.
So I just to assure you, Matt, that I did reach out for best practices with the Government Finance Officers Association for auditing procurement, and I can forward that on through to the Board of Education. But they do recommend. They do talk about the need. Again, not every CPA firm can do governmental audits. They have to be licensed that way, and so they do talk about that in their best practices. They recommend contracts longer than at a minimum of 5 years. And then they talk about why a public entity would need to stay with certain auditors. Ken also does Chemeketa. They've been doing Chemeketa for 38 years, Lynn Benton for 24 years. So it's just that expertise when it comes to single audit and financial aid, that experience with that group. So I just want to assure you that we did reach out for best practices with GFOA.
Okay, I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to put myself in the queue. I appreciate the information you provided about the scoring, Greg. I will say that I am also interested in the fact that we're not selecting a local auditor when we have the option to do that. That company, Moss Adams, they work with students at the U of O. They have intern opportunities, right? They're giving back into our community. I also noticed on their website they have over 100 years of experience, and importantly enough to me, maybe, is they're ranked as one of the 100 best companies in the United States for by Working Mothers Magazine for how they treat their employees and the type of support they give to working women as a family member. So I understand the decisions that went into selecting the Kenneth Coon and Company, but I do agree with my board colleague, Rosie Pryor, that I am interested in seeing us also think about the community benefits agreement when we're making decisions about this and the relationship these and where we're investing our dollars in the organizations that could potentially be locally putting back into our community as well. So that being said, I don't see any other hands. And Mike?
I'd like to move that we approve the award of this contract to the Kenneth Coons and Company, and that we simultaneously notify Moss Adams that a major reason why we could not give them further consideration is because it would have cost us between 170 and 200 hours of staff time, and they may want to consider adding a staff member that can do what needs to be done to meet our requirements.
So is that part of your motion?
It is.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion to approve the RFP, auditor RFP for Kevin Coons and Company, and it also includes providing information to Moss and Adams as to why we made that decision with a recommendation. Donna, can you call the roll?
Willie Johnson? Was that a aye?
Yes.
Angela Van Kraus?
Aye.
Mike Eister?
Aye.
Matt Keating?
Nay.
Chelsea Jennings?
Aye.
Rosie Pryor?
Aye.
Lisa Fragala?
Aye. So I'm going to move us on to action item B, which is a motion from board member Angela Van Kraus regarding the emergency fee that the board approved at our last board meeting.
Should I make the motion or talk a little bit first?
Why don't you go ahead and make the motion, and then I'll let you speak to your motion.
I move that if the state funding allocation received by the college is greater than the $641 million projected in March 2021, the $10 per credit emergency fee will be proportionately reduced in increments of $2.50 per additional $15 million in allocated funding. At a funding level of $702 million, the emergency fee will be eliminated. Regardless of the status of the fee, students will not be charged without a direct credit for the full amount to be paid through available federal stimulus funds.
Second.
Okay, you want to speak to your motion, Angela?
Sure, thank you. So the only change so this is identical to the motion that we passed last month with the addition of the second sentence, which clarifies that students will not be charged without a direct credit for the full amount from the federal stimulus funds. In discussion last month, I think we sort of gave some wink and nod direction and received some verbal confirmation that the administration has no intention of charging this fee if it's not offset by federal money. But I think that we as the board have a responsibility to actually codify our will. And our will is, for our discussion, that we would not charge the students if that money is not being offset. And so I wanted to make that clear and in writing. And that's why I have made this motion.
Okay, are there any questions or comments? So just to clarify, the motion made by board member Angela Van Kraus, for the majority of the motion is exactly the same as what we approved previously. It includes language to clarify the intent of the board around what administration, president, and cabinet had already committed to doing. And Angela, would you mind reading that one part again, please?
Absolutely. Regardless of the status of the fee, students will not be charged without a direct credit for the full amount to be paid through available federal stimulus funds.
And I'd also like to note that Angela did work on this with legal counsel to ensure that we got it right. So we have a motion and we have a second. If there's no further discussion, I will ask Donna. Oh, Matt?
So wouldn't this question or wouldn't this motion be an amendment to the motion, or is it just it's a brand new, because it clarifies what the motion was last meeting?
We're going to pass it as a motion made and seconded, and recognize that we are a small board, and Robert's rules recognizes that small boards do have flexibility in how they approach things. I think we all have a good understanding of what we're doing. So are there any other comments or questions? All right, let's go ahead and call the roll, Donna.
Holly Johnson,
Aye.
Angela Van Kraus,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Matt Keating,
Aye.
Chelsea Jennings,
Aye.
Rosie Pryor,
Aye.
Lisa Fragola.
Aye. Thank you. So that motion passes. I'm going to move us on to action item C, which is budget update and adoption of budget balancing framework. Again, much of this has been discussed in past work sessions and meetings. This is an opportunity for the board to confirm, as is past practice, the budget balancing framework, and the action requested is that the Board of Education approve the FY22 budget balancing framework as presented, with the understanding that the college will manage the operational FY22 budget as conditions evolve throughout the year. So I believe we will have an update first, and then we will consider a motion. Zach Evans.
Thank you, Chair Fragola. I'm going to frame this as kind of 3 parts in this update. The first part is going to be an effort to demystify the federal stimulus packages that we've been receiving, and the third one that we will receive. We've used a lot of acronyms to describe these, sometimes interchangeably, and as we're starting to live this work and understanding Department of Education guidance on how to spend these funds, we kind of get lost in the acronym forest. So I'm going to start with the federal stimulus update that's dated, has today's date. And I'm going to ask Brett to share his screen to facilitate this discussion. Thank you, Brett. So with this, we have received, transition to the next one, please. Thank you. So the first higher education emergency relief funding we received, HERF is the acronym, was also the CARES Act. And the full title of the CARES Act was the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. The usage of that funding that the college received is about to expire, but we've already fully spent and obligated those funds. It was highly restrictive. We had a requirement where half of the funding had to go to financial aid grants to students, and the expenses were really focused on the transition to remote learning. So the student portion was a little over 1.5 million. The institutional portion was also a little over 1.5 million, including an additional strengthening, a little bit of money for the strengthening institution funds. The second higher education emergency relief funds, so HERF2 or CRSA, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, allocated a higher amount for higher education than the CARES Act. A flashback a few months ago when we were going through these discussions, the original timing for usage on this award was December 27th and onward. that has been changed. So we can now go back and capture lost revenue and expenditures from March 2020. This one removed the 50-50 requirement for student financial aid grants and the institutional portion. And it also expanded the definition of eligible students. The key here is what also we've been talking about is the lost revenue recovery provision that we can use for the institutional funding portion. So we can go back and estimate lost tuition and fee revenue from last spring term and use that funding to help out the college's financial position. With this, the student portion stayed at minimum the same as the CARES Act. Institutional portion increased substantially, and then we received an additional strengthening institution funds. That moves us to HERF 3, which is the American Rescue Plan Act. So again, a substantially more amount obligated for higher ed. This one is a lot of to be determined at this time. We're hearing that we could potentially use the money into fiscal year 23. They have reinstated the 50-50 split requirement for student financial aid grants. They've added additional outreach requirements for the financial aid. And we're seeing so far a requirement that we are going to implement evidence-based practices to monitor COVID. So the proportions here are the spending, kind of two approximations. We've seen an initial framework released of about 7.9 million for each, but we won't know for sure until the final allocation is distributed. And then that leads us to the next couple slides. I'm going to overview some of the student funding. And Dr. Mindy Du is on Zoom. So if we have any specific questions about how the student allocations have shaken out, Dr. Du is here to answer any questions. So the CARES Act, again, more restrictive. Students had to meet Title IV eligibility requirements, which is financial aid requirements. We also had restrictions on DACA international students or exclusively online students. And we had to provide funding through kind of emergency pass-through grants. So what Lane has done, block grants for over 3,500 students, and 60% were Pell eligible. And the students received $380 for the spring and another $260 for summer. And these payments kind of mostly expended all of that student allocation. There was a little bit of carryover, which has now been allocated. The second one, same allocation as the CARES Act, but we opened up what an eligible student was. So the parameters were expanded. So this money can reach more students than the first round. And then we can go to 3. I'm sorry, allowable uses. The source of funding has also then opened up what we can do with it. So not only just the emergency pass-through grants, but we also can waive fees, get into some kind of tuition discounts, digital textbook access, and with the student portion and student consent, we can write off kind of past due debt. Now, the student portion requires consent to do this from the student. We can use institutional dollars to address this issue without, in that case, receiving student consent, because they've split how the rules on the two different buckets. So what Lane has done, formed a committee to determine the best way to address the needs, provided block grants to students, and then we'll do another round of grants coming in spring term. And then a recap of HERF 3, a lot that we don't know yet, waiting for further guidance on how we can distribute those fundings. The next couple of slides go more into the CARES Act. And so the first one, couldn't use it for lost revenue. It was direct expenses related to COVID, specifically with moving to remote learning. So some of the things that we use it for faculty costs and staff training to cover costs for converting courses. We purchased a number of laptops and Chromebooks, and then we purchased PPE and other testing and cleaning supplies related to COVID prevention. Covered that. And then the other one too is we did have that $10 per credit emergency remote fee, which we then use the CARES funding to cover that cost to students. Going into PERF, a lot more dollars to use. They've expanded the allowable use, like I mentioned, lost revenue. There still are some items that aren't available. We can't do capital improvements and we can't market. So what have we done? This is where coming into the budget planning when we're going through the cycle and getting us to the balancing options and framework that I'll transition to in a second. So we have, we're developing a framework to estimate all of our lost revenue and apply this funding to where we can throughout our funds. We have also, so we've set aside some money for contracted and part-time labor expenditures. We have set aside, I'm working with academic and student affairs to set aside a budget to increase and provide additional student support activities. I'm working with ASA to set aside a budget as the college moves to a phased approach to reopen safely. We're setting aside a budget to accommodate social distancing requirements and adhering to CDC and OHA public health guidelines. We're investigating using these funds to cover labor expenditures associated with hosting, administering, and staffing the staff and student vaccination clinics on campus. All of these themes and kind of the expense buckets I'm referencing, these preliminary kind of evolving plans, these are all we're reviewing as eligible expenses under the second round of stimulus money. We've also set aside a budget for technology purchases and minor revisions or renovations to address social distancing requirement. We are phasing out the $10 per credit remote online fee, and we've replaced that with the emergency fee. And this grant allows us to do indirect cost recovery, which means that all of these federal dollars that are coming in, we can charge a surcharge on those and collect additional revenue for the college. PERF 3, kind of with the student portion, we're anticipating a nice sum of money to come and help us address these additional expenses we're having, plus our lost revenue concerns, and there's not enough information at this time for the American Rescue Plan. Thank you, Brett. So with that, if we could pull up are there any questions on any of that material that?
So do we have any questions about the federal relief packages? Matt?
Yeah, I understand so much is in flux right now with the ARP, and I would find it informative at our next board meeting if we could drill down as to what our requests were to our lawmakers and or through OCCA for funding that was that's coming through the state to be dispersed through local communities. So I get that it's an ever evolving moving target, but it might help this board see what some of the empty buckets that need to be filled are on and off campus.
Holly?
Thank you. So in one part of your report, and thank you for such a thorough report, you mentioned that there would be more discussion around how to disperse the funds going forward for eligible students, but you didn't give any figures as to how you're going to reach those students who have the highest need. So I'm just curious, or the process, how you're going to detect or determine which students would be receiving additional funding. I'm just curious if thought has been gone into that, having served in financial aid and scholarships for many years. Are we going to look at the EFCs, the expected family contribution, and who has the lowest contribution, and then they will be first picked to receive the additional federal stimulus funding? Just curious if thought has been put into that. I mean, as we know, a lot of the students and the majority of our students at the community college level would probably fall into that category. So will there be a cutoff of, from 0 to 2,500 EFCs will be awarded that money? Or are you just going to take guidance and information from our financial aid folks as to who will be awarded that additional funding? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I saw Mindy pop up, so I'm going to transition this over to Dr. Du.
Thank you. And Holly, what a wonderful question. Thank you for the opportunity to answer. Indeed, students and worrying about students has occupied everybody in student affairs for the last year, and worrying and hoping and working toward helping as much as we can where it's needed. So thank you for that. We've taken a couple of different approaches, and I'm going to digress just a little bit here so that we can think about what we've done in the past and then where we are now and what we're going to do in the future. So when our first funding came out, it was very restrictive, and there was no funding for our students who are international, none of our students who didn't have a social security number, students who were in non-credit classes. And we formed a committee across the campus, and we had student advocate. So we always include students in these as well. And we did the best that we could. We checked with our financial aid partners around the state. And that particular money was only allowed to go to students who had filled out a FAFSA, who were financial aid eligible. So our amazing student government stepped in, and they used some of their own money to help support our students who didn't qualify. They allocated money for our international students, our GED students, our ESL students, and I really loved that. This year we have fewer restrictions. So last year we did a block grant for the initial funding. And then this year we decided that anybody who had applied for financial aid would be part of the block grant. There were thousands and thousands of them. And we wouldn't ask, because we know that sometimes even asking can be a barrier. And so those who did not qualify for the CARES Act generally qualified for the GEAR funding, and that was the governor's emergency education funding. And that was specifically for those who intended for those who did not qualify. We spent about half of that. Students, we put an inclusive, I think it was 4 or 5 questions, application up with instructions in Spanish and in English. And students could apply. We would vet them through, and we would give them up to $500. We do have that application open now for the same set of students, and we've taken an additional step of pre-qualifying them and sending them an email. Hey, did you know you might qualify for this? And then so our CARES 2 funding, we are working towards the second distribution of that. So the first one was the block grant again. And then we'll meet with the committee one more time before we disperse again. And Holly, I see your hand up, so I'm almost there. And then, and I'm so excited about this, right? And I also want to give a shout out to our foundation, who has done so much to raise emergency funding for students who, because when you have a crisis like this, it helps to have support from your school, but what really pays the bills is money, right? So big shout out to our foundation partners. And so with our CARES 3 funding, we're not really sure how it's going to go, but we will continue to work with our committee in the college, across the campus, with our students, and board input would certainly be welcome in that. I hope that's helpful.
And my hand is up because I have a question about ORSA. And if you're familiar with it, for folks who can fill out almost an alternative FAFSA. And so are we including that population in this formula to include some of this additional money? And then you said that some of your other teams or groups on campus came to service and offered some money to help those who are probably DACA students who are not eligible to fill out the financial aid. But then in your comment, you said for everyone who applied on FAFSA. So, right, I think you said everybody who applied, or did you say everybody who was eligible?
Those who were eligible, who had applied for the FAFSA that were eligible.
Eligible
received that
for what,
funding.
a Pell Grant?
Yes.
Because we're all eligible for financial aid, right? A federal student loan is financial aid, which I know a lot of people don't understand, but it is. And so eligible for Pell Grant or eligible for free money or eligible for financial aid? Because if you're not in default in federal loans, we're all eligible for federal financial aid. So just asking for a little clarification there.
I do not wish to misspeak, but I believe that is if you were eligible for a Pell Grant. A very high percentage of our students are.
Thank you. And thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mindy. And Mindy, if you have additional information you'd like to follow up with the board, we'd love to hear it. Thanks for that information. So Zach, do you want to keep us moving?
Yeah, so I'm gonna, yes.
Great.
Thank you. So the second item that's there, it's labeled, it has the March 17th date on it. That was the budget update that we provided last month. And I'm not going to ask Brett to share this. It's just more of there as a reminder that there's some high level items from that. The first budget committee meeting will be May 5th at 5 p.m. So 2 weeks from today. The Oregon June economic and revenue forecast released on May 19th. June 16th is the LCC budget hearing. And June 30th is the legal deadline to adopt the FY22 budget.
Okay, so there's a pause. So Rosie,
Yeah,
I see Rosie.
Jack, did you have more?
I do, yes. I just saw the hand go up, so I wanted to pause if you had a question.
Well, I don't know if I'm preempting where you were going to go next. If you were going to walk us through this document, you said you weren't going to put it up on the screen, but I do have a question about the March 17th budget document, budget update. It shows us dipping into our PERS reserves to balance the budget. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, so Brett, can you pull up the March packet? Thanks.
And Zach, my question is, when did the board discuss that? I can remember having a conversation with Greg maybe a year ago, and there was tremendous unease among board members about dipping into those PERS reserves. And so I'm just not remembering when this must have come up, and there must have been the sense that the board would be supportive of this.
So the PERS reserve that's referenced here in the 860,000, Brett, can you go to the second page, please? Page, yeah, page, no, back to the March update, but page 2 of the March update. That's the PowerPoint. Thank you. Yeah, page 2 here. Thank you. So here, consistent with the budget proposal for FY22 includes another 860,000 of the PERS reserve that we hold in Fund 9 to sustain our OPE rates. And at the bottom of this page, that assumption, you scroll down a little bit to the bottom of this page, the PERS reserve balance is, right, stop, thanks. Sorry, I'm getting a little excited. The OPE right there, so this projection assumes that we were using 860,000 of that. The gray boxes on the bottom are showing what the PERS reserve balance would be at the end of next year. And that also shows that we've been using this at least, I believe, from FY 18, 19, 20, 21, and next year would be 22. Would be the 4th or 5th year in a row that we are dipping in. Now these are college, the college funded this, and the balance lives in Fund 9. So it's more of the kind of the administrative restricted fund. So we've been drawing it out the last couple of years to help stabilize our OPE rates. And even with doing that, our rates are still going up. So that.
So Zach, for all intents and purposes, we're continuing to spend down what amounts to savings in order to balance the budget.
Yes, we are using the PERS reserve fund balance to help stabilize our OPE rates.
Okay, so I don't see another hand. Did you want to continue?
Yes, so also in that document, Mike?
Well, I was just going to say, I assume that the reason the PERS reserve fund was set aside was in the event that we might need it, and we need it. So am I correct in that assumption?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Zach. And sorry, Mike, I didn't see your hand, so.
So then the next couple pages of that update, we go through our assumptions and our kind of our projection categories. We have an estimated general fund balance worksheet in there. We also have a list of FY22 investments that we're going to make into next year's budget. And then finally, what there is we have a series of about 3 balancing scenarios. B being the Administration and Budget Development Subcommittee proposal or budget balancing framework, as well as narratives that go with that. So that, Brett, if you can bring up the third piece now, thank you. So what I've done is I took the Budget Development Subcommittee and Administration Budget Balancing Framework that was the context of scenario B, and I built it into a kind of top to bottom chart. So some of these are estimates and then are balancing targets for these different levers. The board has taken action so far on the emergency fee as well as the tuition adjustment. Where I went with why I was going with the presentation earlier is I wanted to talk about how the emergency relief funding does allow us to recover lost revenue, which is why there's lost revenue recovery levers in here. As I mentioned, it's also going to generate grant indirect costs. So that was a change to help balance this framework. Moving into contracted personnel and part-time personnel, for the sake of not adding another line that was other personnel expenditures for OPE, I merged the OPE calculation into these line items. The strategy for the contracted personnel, the strategies, faculty early separation incentive, bond administration. Now that's salary and wages that from our facilities management planning team that we can use just for kind of administering the bond. Leveraging the HERF funding, holding vacant positions open, and staggering the hiring. Part-time personnel, a lot of the same. I mentioned that we were setting aside budgets for student support activities, as well as additional administrative support as we're safely phased in reopening. Materials and services, we set aside budget for increased PPE or small modifications to spaces to rely or to upgrade a space to be in compliance with CDC and OHA or OSHA guidelines. Also some money for technology and retrofitting some classrooms or conference rooms to get tech in there to make sure we can safely continue to safely meet. A little bit of capital outlay shift, and then the general fund ending fund balance restoration target for year 2. All of this comes into, in this case, this preliminary work, or not preliminary work, but this framework, budget cap of 0. Now, estimates, targets, things can change and fluctuate. We'll need, be nimble between these categories and these levers as the year goes on. The note on the bottom is that, and thank you, Rosie, for asking that question about the PERS reserve, is that this planning projection and then the balancing ideas here, it does include capital reserves, 300,000 capital reserves to help us with the major maintenance funding for next year, as well as 660 of the PERS reserve. And then I mentioned the major maintenance transfer for deferred maintenance of 700,000. So these are the assumptions and kind of the items, the balancing options, and the framework that will be going into the proposed budget that we will be discussing in a few weeks.
So, Zach, thank you for that very thorough presentation. So it is recommended that the Board of Education approve the FY22 budget balancing framework, and I would be receptive to a motion, and I see Rosie Pryor's hand is raised. Rosie?
I'd be happy to make a motion, but I do have further questions. So.
Absolutely.
Okay, I don't have the question right in front of me, but for what it's worth, I move the board approve the recommended budget framework for the 2022. Do I have the right for the FY22 budget?
Who seconded that? Was that Mike? Okay, thanks. So seconded by Mike. So Rosie.
Point of clarification, the language in front of us reads, the Board of Education approved the FY22 budget balancing framework as presented with the understanding that the college will manage the operational fiscal year 2022 budget as conditions evolve throughout the year. I just want to ensure that that's the motion that's on the floor, please. Great, thanks.
I see Rosie shaking her head. Thank
Thanks.
you, everybody. Rosie, do you want to go ahead?
I do have a question. I just need to have some educate Rosie questions answered. The first is that as I'm looking at the Budget Development Subcommittee budget balancing framework, the very last document that you showed us, when I read the comment section under contracted personnel and part-time personnel, it says a $1 million contracted personnel reduction, a little over $500,000 part-time personnel reduction. Do I understand correctly that the expectation is we would reduce personnel costs by over $1.5 million? The reason I'm asking that question is the previous document, which is the March 17th budget comparison, shows an overall increase in the cost of college personnel of almost or just over $4 million. So I need to understand, are we reducing personnel and paying more to those who remain, or are we keeping personnel levels the same? To help me understand what this is telling me.
So I think it's a mixture of both. It is a reduction in the number of personnel on campus. And it's also that with some of the agreements we have, salaries and wages are increasing going into next year. So there's a mixture there. When we build the projection, which is what the scenarios were made off of, we take the position list that we have and we forecast that out for what next year would be. After doing that and looking at our other forecasted kind of assumptions, we were looking at that $6 million deficit. The balancing options, there is the faculty early separation incentive. So that means that some positions will not be filled next year. It does not mean that those positions won't return at a later date. What this also is we are moving some of these expenditures to have the grant, the emergency relief funding, pick up some of the expenses.
So if I understand what you just said, your hope is that of that $4 million proposed increase in the cost of college personnel, your hope is the federal funds can help close that gap or pay that expense? I really want to understand this because it feels like in a period of continually declining enrollment. I mean, I'm watching the trend line. It's still not going up, it's going down. We're proposing to increase the cost of personnel, according to that first document, by $4 million, if I understand it correctly. So I want to be clear in my own mind that that's what we're proposing to do here.
I think I lost where we were in the first document. If you could just mention that again so I can pull it up real quick. I'll make sure I give you an accurate response.
Sure. Just have to get it in front of me. If you look in that March 17th projection estimate, in the far right column, if you look at expenditures, personnel, the total goes from 75 million this year to 79 million next year. And so should I understand that to mean you're expecting us to pay $4 million more in personnel costs next year?
So with the planning projection as it was built without applying any of our levers, yes. However, the middle column or the blue column is a forecasting of actuals this year.
Mm-hmm.
So that was with all of the furloughs and the different sacrifices that our contracted staff went through, plus a reduction in the number of part-time classified staff when we transitioned remotely. The projection for next year does anticipate a scaling to a degree as we safely phase we phase reopening safely.
Mm-hmm.
So we were forecasting greater expenditures to saying that, yes, we believe that our personnel expenditures will be greater than they are currently this year because of the operating environment we've been in for the last year.
And the actual number, just to, again, based on that last document you showed us, which showed a $1.5 million reduction in personnel, so that our expenditures would be greater, the number of people would be smaller.
Marge?
Yes. So yes, Rosie, and I just want to reiterate how can you do that? It is changing on a daily basis, but as we go, we continue to go to weekly meetings with the HEC. We're finding more and more every day what we can charge the stimulus package. So there are whole people on this campus that literally all they've done for a year is address COVID.
Right.
So we are taking the whole salary, the OPE. Then there's groups of people who are doing this 50% of their time. The bad news is this took them away from their work. But the good news is that we're going to get reimbursed for that time. And going forward for this whole year, we're going to charge it. So the number does look big. You're absolutely right. But this is another one of those examples where we're going to try to leverage the federal money.
Okay, do we have any other comments or questions? I do have myself in the queue. Okay, I am just going to say that I am in support of this budget framework. I do think there was a lot of effort put into it from the budget subcommittee, and I think it does move us towards some sustainability efforts with putting 1.5 million to the ending fund balance, which is a goal that this board has had. And we will also, I'm sure, get to dive even deeper into some of these details in the greater budget process with our budget committee. Marge?
No question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not seeing any further hands raised. Angela, I did see your hand go up and go down. Are you good? Okay, great. So we have a motion on the table to approve the FY22 budget balancing framework as presented, with the understanding that the college will manage the operational FY22 budget as conditions evolve through the year. So I'm going to ask Donna to call the roll, please.
Holly Johnson,
Aye.
Angela Van Kraus,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Matt Keating,
Aye.
Chelsea Jennings,
Aye.
Rosie Pryor,
No.
Lisa Fragala.
Aye. So that motion passes, and we will move on to the board retreat agenda, which I am quite excited about for the reason that we will have a wonderful guest to dive into the diversity, equity, and inclusion professional development scheduled on that day. Dr. Rawl is a professor at the University of California, Riverside, and her leadership and research is focused on the intersection of governance of higher education and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm excited because she looks at equity as an integral part of regular board work, not an added responsibility. And she'll work with us on interactive exercises that connect an equity framework to board decisions that we typically make. So we'll be utilizing equity as a strategic asset for mission success. So that will be a big bulk of our day, and you have that agenda for the day in front of you. I'm not going to go through it blow by blow. It is going to be virtual, and there is a lunch break and some additional professional development or onboarding for our new board members. So I would entertain any input on the agenda, or I would entertain a motion.
Move approval of the proposed July board retreat agenda.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, so moved by Rosie, and I did have a second from Holly and then Mike. Rosie, did you want to speak to your motion? Okay, seeing none. I will ask Donna to call the roll. Matt?
Is it appropriate for me to vote on this since I won't be here for the retreat?
Yes, you may vote on this as your stewardship of our future board.
All right, happy to.
Okay. Donna, you want to call the roll?
Okay. Holly Johnson,
Aye.
Angela Van Kraus,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Matt Keating,
Aye.
Chelsea Jennings,
Aye.
Rosie Pryor,
Aye.
Lisa Fragala.
Aye. And I'm just super excited about it. So I'm glad that motion passes. So we will move into our discussion items. We are moving on to welcoming and culturally appropriate spaces on campus. And we have Greg Evans to present to us on that. Greg?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to be brief. Per per resolution 646, the Black Lives Matter resolution, point 8 addresses the issue of welcoming and diverse spaces on campus and throughout the institution. So one of the things that we're going to have to do initially is to develop a multicultural cultural audit of all of the buildings and spaces on campus. And I also would include our campus downtown as well as at Florence too. So this process is quite an undertaking. Based on some preliminary research that I found, it involves quite a few steps to it that will be in order for us to gain a sense of where we're at as an institution with our buildings and spaces, and then taking that analysis and working on making changes, improvements, and additions to those spaces. So tentatively, I have twisted the arms of a few people to begin to work on this as a committee. We're going to work with IR and Richard Plott. Mindy Dew will be working with us as well. And Jennifer Hayward, she doesn't know that yet, but she will. And Tom Goodhue, who's our bond project manager. One of the things a couple of things I want to highlight here is that this will require the involvement of all of our stakeholders at the college: students, classified staff, faculty, and management, and possibly a board member or two in that effort. We're going to some of the different ways that you could do that. I give you an example. Marquette University has done this in the past and recently over the last few years. And they took a team out of stakeholders and they spread out with clipboards throughout the campus and began looking at each of the buildings, the spaces, the names of those places, as well as if the building was welcoming and culturally appropriate for students, faculty, and staff to engage. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. The second thing is after we do that space audit, I think that we're going to need to sit down and build a vision for what kind of changes we want to have on the campus, to the buildings, and to open spaces on campus, such as plazas and other areas of that nature. College is 56 years old. It was built in an age where multiculturalism, diversity was not a factor and not an issue. So it's very monolithic in our presentation and geared to basically another generation. We have had additional buildings come online since that. I'll note Building 1, which has international flags hanging there. There's also multicultural artwork in the building, and it also houses the Multicultural Center. But other buildings on campus, we need to examine those, look at what we need to do in terms of making some changes and making some improvements as far as our cultural profile is concerned. And we'll need to develop a budget and determine what the costs are. I think just based on where we are as a campus and as an institution, we may have to approach this in phases in terms of improving and changing our campus. I don't know how much money that would cost yet. I haven't gotten to that point in the research, but I would say my best guess that it would be a significant chunk of change in order to do that. So therefore, I'm thinking of a phased in approach and looking at specific buildings, highly engaged buildings that need to be vetted and assessed in that cultural audit. In addition to that, since we are still in the planning phase for our bond and what we want to do with our bond in terms of making sure that we have culturally appropriate buildings and spaces, we will need to sit down with the bond team and the bond leadership and Jennifer Hayward and Tom to really kind of figure out, okay, we haven't done anything yet. We haven't made any changes. We haven't, built any new buildings, but we do need to do this up front before we get to the point of actually sinking shovels in the ground and making those changes. So if you have any questions, I'm available, and please feel free to comment.
Thank you very much. It sounds like an exciting project. Are there any questions or comments for Greg? Matt?
Greg, long time no see.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what the public engagement piece of this would look like? Is there a way that the public can log on and either participate in a virtual audit or add their suggestions or observations to us in any way, shape, or form? Is there any thinking about that, or is that a little premature?
Well, I think it's a little premature, Matt. I think that initially we want to get the input and the participation of our core campus stakeholder groups. When we look at including folks from the community, I think that there would be a place for them to engage this work and be able to make comments. I think it's important, particularly for parents who are looking at Lane for their students in the future, other members of the community, business community, all of those areas where folks have a stake in the shaping and the look of the college. So we will be inviting them to make comment. I'm not sure exactly how we will use them in terms of the audit itself, but I believe that there will be a place that we'll be able to carve out to gain, community comment, because the community drives by the institution all the time, and quite often they come through the campus and they use the campus for various purposes, walking dogs, playing Frisbee, all of that. So the look of the campus, the look of our buildings, the look of our spaces, athletic fields, etc., is going to be critical to making a substantial, diverse, multicultural change.
Thank you. And I see Holly Johnson's hand is up.
Greg, thank you so much for all of the work I know that you put into this. And if I can just suggest that I think focus groups on campus, right there in the space, is probably something that we can work on. And I'd be more than happy to help with that. Thank you for your work.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. I think focus group information and data is going to cross over in this effort from our campus climate survey. So if we need to develop specific focus groups, that's something that we will do, but we need to do preliminary work, and that is assessing where our buildings are, where our spaces are, and what kind of suggested improvements that we might make. And then after that, I think that focus groups and information from focus groups would be appropriate to gather and to put into our data set.
Great, thank you very much. Sounds like an exciting project, and I really appreciate the tiered or phased approach that you mentioned. I think that's really strategic and takes into the consideration the long-term commitment to doing this work at the college. Thanks so much, Greg. I'm not seeing anyone else's hand up, so I'm gonna go ahead and move us on to the next topic. We have the COVID-19 reopening safely update from Provost Jarrell.
Good evening.
Oh wait, I'm going to get it right. Provost Jarrell.
There you go. Thank you. Good evening, Chair Fragola, board members. So to date, since our last board meeting, we haven't had any updates to the institutional plan. In my report there, you can see a list of half a dozen, 8, I think, altogether, departmental plans that have been reviewed and approved for various in-person activities. I do want to comment that we have seen an increase in cases in campus over the past week. This trend is tracking what's happening in Lane County in general. Over the past week, the highest percentage of cases that we're seeing in Lane County are in the 10 to 29 age range. I think about 53% or so of all positive cases over the past week have been in that age range, with the peak being in the 18 to 22-year-old crowd. So we're falling along with that general Lane County kind of a statistic. At the same time, we're seeing in the county a decrease in positivity in individuals that are 60 and older, indicating that vaccinations are working. I'm proud of our team at the health clinic, led by Laura Green, Dawn Barth, and a number of volunteers to actively vaccinate a lot of our community members. As of Monday, all individuals, as you know, over 16 are eligible. We have began the process of vaccinating our students. And so we hope to be able to see those positivity levels drop in that 10 to 29 age range, as well as we vaccinate that 18 to 22-year-old crowd. I also want to commend our student affairs crowd. We have been able to generate some funds to reimburse our students for travel to campus since the buses are limited, so that we can remove as many barriers as we can to access to vaccination. So I feel very proud of all that work that's been going on there, and hopefully we'll see this surge subside as the vaccinations increase as well. And that's my report.
Hey, questions, comments for Paul? Okay, thank you, Paul. Look forward to hearing future updates as we move.
You're quite welcome.
Forward.
Paul, yeah, I have something really quick, Chair Fragola.
Go ahead, Matt.
Based on testimony we received at the top of the meeting, would administration be able to come back at our next board meeting and maybe address some of those items in particular to provide additional clarity for our staff and our faculty and our student body on campus as we hopefully get out of this fourth wave? But there seemed to be questions raised that even I had that sparked my curiosity. So I would love to see us address those specifically when we next gather, please.
Yeah, and we have communications planned to go out this week centered around that. And, in short, we follow recommendations from Lane County Public Health. We've been very fortunate that they have allowed us, deputized, if you will, Dawn Barth to be able to do contact tracing for us. And so it's really important that, we follow their direction and their lead so that we can maintain that ability to do that, because that keeps us all safer, I believe. But we'll put the communications out there. And if there's anything in addition that you would like apart from that, let us know and we'll provide it.
Just mostly informational, please. If memory serves, the testimony revolved around educating the student body in particular about the fact that you could still be an asymptomatic carrier. My cousin got his second shot today in LA and then went and visited our 94-year-old grandmother, not recognizing that probably a good idea to wait 2 weeks. So the more we can double down on information without using an anthropomorphic fruit of the loom looking COVID guy, the better. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You bet. We can never have too much education. Appreciate it.
Okay, sorry if I missed that real hand there. I have grown accustomed to the digital hand. I'm going to move us on. Oh, Angela.
I'm sorry. I know it seems like we're ready to go and then keep getting in there. Paul, you mentioned the travel to and fro. I'm wondering, for our students who are OHP eligible, are they able to use their non-emergent medical transport benefit to come in and get their vaccine?
I apologize. I don't know the answer to that, but I can try to find that out for you.
Oddly specific, so probably not necessary. Just curious.
I do see Marge has her hand up, though. Maybe Marge knows. Marge?
So actually, I just had a conversation with LTD yesterday, and this came up, and all we have to do is call and they can provide transportation. We just have to get that word out to the students. So we're reimbursing after the fact, but we're also preventatively, we have to give them a phone number that they could call. And as soon as I get that information, we'll make sure the students have that.
Great. Why am I not surprised you knew that detailed question, Marge? All right. Any other questions on our reopening safely update? All right. So I'm going to move us on to bond projects with Tom Goodhue.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Really exciting what Greg Evans was just talking about. Looking forward to working with him. So I wanted to start with that. Also want to say that on Monday evening, we have our bond oversight committee that will be going through in more detail. So I think Chair Fragel is going to join us for that and give a talk and give some direction on how we keep you updated in the future as these projects move on. With that, what I want to do is I give you an awful lot of information for you to read. I'll go over the highlights of what we had, and then if you have specific thoughts, we'll come back to, we can pull up those documents if we need to. But first document is the bond prioritization and implementation principles. Based on Greg's discussion, I can see that we need to add a diversity and equity element into that one to add to that. But most of these came out of the advertising for the bond and the things that came out of that, as well as the master plan. So really looking at safety and security of buildings, addressing deferred maintenance and making sure the buildings don't degrade too quickly. Some other things about trying to find matching grants and saving money for that. The second document that I have together is one that I really designed as a dashboard to throughout the bond series here over the next 5-7 years or more. Based on some of the initial things, identified roughly 30 projects, major projects, allocated funds to them, have allocated almost 90% of the funds, saved about 10-12% for contingency funds, knowing that budgets change, things happen, and inflation happens. So we can go through any of those, or if you have questions on that, we can talk about it. The third item is kind of what we're looking at working on in the next year or two. That's this capital project look ahead. First two projects we've started on the health professions building. Have a design team on board. I just got out of a meeting earlier today on that, and then we were actually talking about how we bring Greg in to talk about that cultural diversity as we're early in the process. Working on getting an architect for the Florence Center, and then also moving on to a renovation of Building 12, which will be another project that's coming up, which focuses around the CTE training. And then the final document is kind of a meaty one. It is revolves around the community benefits that you passed. And the document I provided you with, Exhibit B, is a combination. We are going to be using this as an attachment to all of our construction contracts and design contracts. And the first part of that we've always used, that talks about a lot of the Oregon statutes around BOLI and other pay rates, but seemed like a great place to incorporate the community benefits because so many of those are tied together based on wages and other benefits that are so tied together. So that's my 2-minute blurb, I guess. So I'll open it up to the board, and because I want to hear from you.
Mike.
I don't recall whether we asked at the time we passed the community benefits agreement that we get periodic updates, from the on the agreement as we enact and implement the expenditures on the bond projects. If we didn't ask for it, would it be reasonable to ask for a periodic update?
Yes, it is. It's going to take a little while until we get some construction projects underway. But yeah, that is one of the things we're trying to figure out how to do.
Thanks, Tom.
Rosie Pryor.
Thank you. I just wanted to offer my compliments. What a comprehensive report. I think there'll be plenty for the oversight committee to kind of get a look at and begin to understand next week when they meet. So I just wanted to thank you for all this good quality background. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I have myself in the queue, but if they're certainly willing to let others go ahead of me, or I'll keep an eye out for a hand, a wave, or a digital hand. I just needed clarification on a question that a colleague asked via email that I appreciated. Are we losing state funding because of the option to fast track? Or are we not becoming eligible for additional state funding? Because when we first initiated this bond effort, part of our timing was based on the rationale that we didn't want to lose state funding that had already been promised to us, matching funds. So could you clarify that, please?
Yeah. First off is the state funding that was tied to the bonds, or part of that is for the health professions building. The state has they're in the process of they're setting up. I think we actually have the agreement for the $8 million there. So that one's guaranteed. In my project for the building, I think it's building 16. That's actually looking at my first round going through was trying to execute it as quickly as possible. And what we look at is for the next state funding allocation that we can apply for in the next year, looking at delaying that project about a year so that we can put that into the queue for the state funding. Because if we rush into it, my understanding of the state ask is that you can't have started the project yet. They want a fresh project. So that's where I'm trying to, find those matching funds. We're also looking for other grants and, other opportunities.
Okay, great. I just wanted clarification on that. And because we had also received, I think, a seismic improvement grant previously as well, correct?
Yes, we have one for building 19.
Okay.
It's underway. And we also have one that we hope to hear back any day now that we applied for, that will be part of the Florence project. That we've asked for money there that we're counting on including, but we'll find a way to make that happen.
Okay, great. Thanks for that.
And we'll
clarification.
continue to do those as well. So that's where matching funds is a big deal.
Awesome. Marge. You're still on, you're still muted.
There you go. Yeah, you're correct. Our next ask could be for 2023. So the preparatory work now will lead us to that.
Okay. Are there any other questions and comments from the board? I do have one more item. Okay, not seeing any, I'm gonna go ahead. So I do appreciate the detailed level of work in this report, and I'm also hearing that you're pursuing additional grant writing opportunities. That's fantastic. I want to express my disappointment, though, that my repeated feedback that I would like to see the cap on the construction contracts lower than 1 million seems to have not been received well, or maybe not heard, because I really do feel that during the conversations that we had about the community benefits agreement, the manner in which we communicated with the community about our bond campaign, the commitments that we made for local investments, I really do think a $500,000, a lower bar is much more aligned with the values that we discussed. And so I am still very interested in seeing that million come down to 500,000. And I know we've talked about this before, so.
Yeah. No, I understand there are some points in the procurement rules that make some sense in there, but certainly you're going to try and apply it as much as possible. And that's part of the reason we gave you the detailed breakdown, so you could understand.
Okay, so I saw two hands going like this at the same time. So I'm going to go to Mike first and then Matt.
So Lisa, if that is, it seems to me that would be a change in what the board originally passed, and that it should require board action in order for the staff to implement that change. Unless I'm misunderstanding something, if you're disappointed, it seems like your disappointment should be focused on the board, not on the staff.
I'm going to go to Marge and then we'll go to Matt.
So I think it would be best if we did a little bit of a primer on what these folks are dealing with regard to ORS and purchasing. I get a lot of phone calls from purchasing about this issue, and I'm not an expert on it, but Mike, I don't know if Mike, if you want to address it globally, but I'd like to prepare something for all of you, just so you can see what we can do directly and what we have to what do we have to do without violating ORS. It's a very fine line, and we definitely want to do what you all wanted us to do, as long as we stay within the law.
So did you want Michael Blade to discuss that, Marge?
Mike, you want to just address it more globally, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, I don't think this issue has anything to do really with ORS. As far as, are you talking about Lisa's desire to lower it from 1 million to 500? That's not the issue. I think originally the issue was, as I recall it with Jennifer Hayward talking, is having a lower bar and then implementing the CBA requirements raises the cost to the point where you're not going to get the bang for your buck that you want on those smaller projects. You're not going to get as competitive a bids. So we were looking at the bigger projects. It really has nothing to do with ORS. There are ORS thresholds, but going from 1 million to 500,000 wouldn't cause an issue there.
So I've actually had some conversations with Jennifer, and I don't know if she's present tonight, but she has expressed support and the ability to do that. And I'm wondering, Jennifer, if you can speak to that.
Yeah, we have kept it at 1 million in this document. After talking to Lane County, Tom and I learned a lot about how they've implemented implemented this and the struggles that they've been through in implementing it and making sure that contractors are following all of the provisions. And they're going to go through a full round of 1 or 2 projects before they consider lowering it. And they advised us to do the same. And so that's part of the reason why we'd recommend it. Another reason is because when you're looking at the smaller contract values, 500, 600, 700,000, you're looking at smaller contractors who are going to have a harder time implementing some of these things. And in order to, maybe promote the use of local contractors bidding on these things, we're thinking that allowing the smaller local contractors, making it easier for them to bid on projects that are between 500,000 or less than $1 million is partly what we were thinking. And Tom might have something to add on that too.
No, I think that is a big thing. The overhead and some of the other things, I do get concerned that might shrink our pool or require larger contractors. So, which would defeat the purpose of the local.
Matt, and then I see Rosie's hand.
I may be wrong, but isn't Lane County moving toward a lower threshold?
That is
They have that as a stated goal, but they're not going to do it until after they finish 1 or 2 whole projects, which will be a year or 2 from now.
And I suspect the reason is because of the success of their CBA, which ours is modeled after. And Lane County has a much larger budget than we do, a larger service area. And if they're having conversations about lowering that threshold, I think it would behoove us to recognize the success of their implementation and see how we could mirror that success.
And I think that is our plan, is to mirror their process. And that's why they're holding off right now on lowering that process, but analyzing the data at that $1 million or more threshold to understand the implications of moving it down.
Rosie?
Thank you. I remember this conversation pretty well when this came to us from Jennifer. And I also remember, Lisa, you're expressing your concern about the level of the threshold. I would not be comfortable changing our adopted policy, as Mike has observed, until we have the background that the college president would like to provide us about the impact on potential bidders of endeavoring to apply our CBA requirements to these smaller dollar contracts. So I would just like to suggest to the board that we defer doing anything about this, if anything, until after we've had a chance to get that information from the president.
And Mike.
So I'd just like to confirm with Michael Blade that no single board member, not even the chair, can direct the staff to change something that was in a motion passed by the board. Am I correct in that?
Right.
Now, my other question is, I don't remember what our motion was exactly. Did our motion specify $1 million?
It did not. It did not.
Oh.
Oh, but we did, the board did approve some reports or some recommendations brought to us that contained these numbers. We looked at them. If I'm misremembering, I apologize, but I had the impression that we had given tacit approval to our staff to move forward with the constructs they brought us.
So the original CBA does not contain a threshold. We've only had discussions about this. We have not made any amendments to the CBA. And each time that this topic has come up, there has been feedback given to request that it be decreased. So you are correct, Mike. We have not made any official decision, and there has been no amendment to the CBA, but that might be something to consider. And then I also hear from Rosie Pryor that the need for more information is quite credible. And so I agree with that. Are there any other questions or comments? All right, well, thank you so much. Mike?
I was just wondering, it seems that we've had some sort of ad hoc information from Lane County. Is there any way we can get sort of an official report from Lane County on how they're doing? And I mean, one of the informal pieces of information I've gotten is that their CBA contracts that they have implemented have come in under budget. But I'd like to get an official report from Lane County so that we are dealing with real data.
That sounds like a great recommendation. I've also heard that their contracts are coming in under budget, lower than they had anticipated. And I have also heard that they're moving rather quickly to the $500,000 level because they've been so successful. So I do think we've had people visit previously to update us on what the county is doing, and I'm sure that's a possibility as well.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, Rosie, did you have another comment? Okay, great. All right, thank you. I'm going to move us on to the next item, which is elimination of faculty research service model in planning and institutional effectiveness. And that is from Richard Platt.
Good evening, Chair and board members. Thank y'all for allowing me to come and speak with y'all tonight. We've had a lot of talk today about modernization, which includes software that we're purchasing. I'm thrilled to be working with Greg on the climate project so we can make Lane an inviting and welcoming campus with a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. In the spirit of that modernization, we are transitioning the older research model services that we've engaged in for quite some time and moving to a modern business intelligence model that's based on decision support, live data, and active on-demand analytics. We have been lacking in this area for some time. This service model will bring us in a manner of this way. The best way I can explain it is years ago, when those of us would get our bank statement once a month, that was stale data. Today, I'm able to pull it up on the app on my phone and get immediate response. We are moving in that direction. We have made great strides in that, as is evidenced in the HR report, which we collaboratively built. It allows us to have a daily refresh on changes or increases in personnel. Now we're able to refresh that information daily and show where we are today versus where we've been over the prior years. We are moving this to all aspects of our college, not only with our personnel, we're moving it with our student body, with our ability to meet student services. It will take some time and it's going to require some transitions. The biggest transition right now is the budget neutral transition, moving away from what has been a siloed research process to an integrated, holistic, active on-demand service for decision support, which requires a greater computer science background. This service will enable not only the members in the college community, but the stakeholders of the community as well, and board members to easily log in to our environment that we are building and receive instant data based on active transactions that are happening on a daily basis. We believe that this model of decision support will move the college forward in a culture of evidence and better help us make continuous improvements. And again, I want to close because I don't want to hold a lot of time in this, but this is a budget neutral transaction. We are not implementing a cost saving measure. We are transitioning from an older model into a newer model with a significant change in the required skill sets. I'd like to turn it back over to the chair for any questions that may be applicable.
Okay, are there any questions or comments? Angela, and then Matt.
Thank you. I asked a question in advance, and so I wanted to sort of raise that to make sure that it's heard in the public as well. And that was my question was about whether this would eliminate a faculty position or reduce the workload and transition a faculty member to a different role. Richard, I believe your reply was this change would eliminate the full-time faculty researcher position and create a new full-time classified report developer position. And then my second question is, do you think that one report developer is sufficient? It's a big school. There's a lot of data.
It is, we are transitioning into the BI model and working side by side with our Ellucian Banner power users. We have users in IT that are already dedicated to the certain modules that are in Banner, such as student records, HR records, budget, finance. There's a long list, but we already have a set of power users that we can rely on. We already have some developers and programmers, which we will be working in partnership with. So we won't be starting from scratch, but we, as this evolves, the workflows will be collaborative. And this is the first step in getting that, where we hope to contain our cost and make sure this is as budget neutral as possible. Yes, we are a big school, but we have got a good start on where we're going in this transition. I hope that responds. I can elaborate more if you need.
So I had Matt and then Mike and then Chelsea.
So this is, thank you. It's being framed as quote, where we are today and where we've been over the years. I'm wondering if the current model can't also give us a snapshot of where we are today and where we've been over the years, because I don't have enough data to support that. This description before launching into the service transition illustrates that the strategy is better aligning and supporting continuous improvements through a data-informed decision-making process.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any data in front of me to make this decision. I do have some pretty interesting industry buzzwords that prompted me to do a Google search, like business intelligence service model is mentioned twice. And when I look up business intelligence service model, it points me right to data mining every time. So would you touch on, would you elaborate on business intelligence service model, please? And if you could also comment on this board making, hopefully, a data-informed decision.
A BI service model is based on 3 parts, and I'll make them as brief as I can. There is a root part which involves the data mining decision trees. That is where our power users and Banner have the tables and so forth, where we store the data. We have to scan those. We then transition that data into usable formats that answer questions, such as what is our enrollment? What was our enrollment over time? What's our trajected enrollment? We take that and we turn it into a visualization, much like the first HR report that you're seeing today, which shows a tree graph. It breaks it out into an easy to read table. The live version of that allows us to pick and choose from past historical pay periods where we have changed over time. The table on the next page, which is an overtime graph, is updated every day. So we are able to make real-time decisions based on existing and future, existing data, today's data, and get a trajectory where we might be. This will take time for us to publish them all. We have some 30 that we've already built. We have some 100 to go. And as we get them vetted from the stakeholders, which would be the deans, the AVPs, the various service models we have on campus, then we will post them and they will be made accessible. Again, this does take time. That's what the service model includes. And could you reiterate the second part, because I went on that one track to answer the first part.
That's all right. I'll follow up with, I guess it's a pretty simple yes or no. Does a faculty position need to be eliminated for this to come to fruition?
And the operations model that we have, I don't have employees that are 24/7, 365 in the faculty model. And 2, the faculty model is based on isolated research, not real-time data. And computer science allows me to use real-time data along with a host of integration from technology that we're already engaged with personnel already in information technology, and it repurposes us to have real-time decision support.
So why wouldn't we just change the faculty model? I bring up all these questions because our board policy empowers this board to approve academic and administrative structures. Our board policy empowers the board to approve major substantive changes in its mission, in our policies, in our programs. Board policy indicates that the board shall request for the president to present the board all contracted hiring and dismissals. So we're being presented this as if it's a budget neutral fix, but there's someone who's going to be losing their job, and the board isn't necessarily learning about it enough to possibly be proactive. We're learning about it as it's on our agenda as, quote, elimination of faculty research model in planning and institutional effectiveness. That's a bit of a red flag.
A research model is not an intelligence model. A research model is based on past data. It is based on isolated data sets that have to be retrofitted, cleaned, purged on a routine basis. It may be a week, it might be 2, it might be a month before you get an answer based on that model.
Okay, so-
Go ahead, ma'am.
No, you go ahead and finish, Richard, and then I'm going to move us on to Mike and Matt. I'm happy to put you back in the queue, okay?
The business intelligence model provides us daily, refreshed, pertinent data, which we can access 24/7, 365. That is the significant difference between the two.
Okay. I have Mike in the queue, followed by Chelsea, and then Holly, I saw your hand as well.
So I'd like to check out 2 assumptions. My first assumption is that the function that the college needs is an administrative function, not a teaching function or a faculty research function. And it sounds to me as though the person who was in that position, even though they were a faculty member, was actually performing an administrative function rather than performing academic research. Am I correct in that, or?
Your assumptions are correct, sir. The faculty member was not engaged in teaching, and in part, the faculty member was engaged in some administrative function. The challenge is that that the model that we're moving forward needs to be a fully administrative, and it needs to be 24/7, 365.
Well, was the person doing academic
Mike,
research?
can I just have a point of information, please?
Go ahead.
So I'm going to ask Michael Blade to remind us about the ORS for discussing personnel decisions, and I'd like all board members to keep it in mind that this is a service model level conversation. Michael Blade, could you remind us of that ORS, please?
Yeah, the executive session ORS sets forth that you need to go into executive session to discuss individual employees unless they request a public hearing, which this particular employee is not. So I would just caution the board to speak about the reorg without discussing the individual employee. And
Thank
what
you,
he
Lisa.
did or
I
didn't
appreciate
do.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I actually have been trying to wrap my brain around that as well.
That's really all I had to say.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I'm going to move to Chelsea and then Holly.
Thank you. I also don't have the hand raised feature, so thank you for being on the lookout for physical hands. I share some of the same concerns that my colleague Matt has brought up this evening. But one of the, just as a point of clarification and to understand what it is we're moving forward with this evening, Matt has mentioned, a couple of times around what decisions we're making. And from what I'm seeing here in the agenda, it looks like we're not actually voting on this. This is a point of information. And so I would just like there to be some more clarification and some comments publicly about why this is not something that we as a board are voting on and why it's something we're merely discussing.
Looks like Richard doesn't have an answer for that. I
don't.
Yes, thank you. So I can address that. So it was presented as a budget neutral decision, and that it didn't have an impact on the budget. And so it was included more as a discussion item. That doesn't mean that so if people remember, we used to have the discussion action items all mixed together. This is only the second meeting that we've started trying to sort them out so that we could provide some clarity around where we needed to take action. And so that doesn't mean that when we're in the discussion section of the agenda, that board members are restricted from suggesting a motion. So I would never discourage a board member from a motion or some level of action if they chose to do that. It's just a way to organize the agenda. Chelsea, did that answer your question?
That does for now, and I think that there were some other board members that wanted to speak, and so if I need to raise my hand again, I'll loop back around.
Okay, Holly, did you want to say something?
Actually, I'm just asking for clarification. So at this point, are we not able to move to adopt and ask for a request to review this model in a year by the stakeholders? I'm just a little unclear. Are we just having a discussion? Are we able to move on this?
So right now we are having a discussion. There's nothing that limits a board member from making a motion. Matt, were you back in the queue?
No, if Holly was going to make a motion, I would have seconded it, and for the sake of discussion, because there's some other points I want to make, but I want to make sure that our full complement has an opportunity to weigh in.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, Holly.
To adopt.
So you would like to make a motion to adopt the proposed service change?
This proposed service change, yes.
Okay, and I also heard you say something.
I do. I have a request for review in 1 year by stakeholders.
Okay, so are you okay if I rephrase that?
Please.
So it sounds like the motion is to adopt the proposed faculty research service model change in planning and institutional effectiveness with a recommendation to review in 1 year.
Second.
Okay, I hope I captured that correctly.
Yes.
Okay, and I have Angela. Oh, sorry, Holly, did you want to speak to your motion? Okay. As a second, Matt, did you want to speak to it? And then I'll go to Angela.
I think Holly's point about reviewing by a stakeholder or bringing community stakeholders to review the model is a sound one. I don't know if I quite heard that in the reiteration of her motion, but that's an important point.
Okay. I might have missed that point in my, I didn't have a chance to write it down. So Holly, was that part of the original motion?
That was part of the original motion, that within a year or after a year that stakeholders have feedback about the new model.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could be in the queue after Angela, please.
Yes. Okay, Angela.
Thank you. I think I'm going to try to ask the same question that I've already heard a couple of times, and maybe worded a little differently so I get the answer I'm looking for. So I know that this item is in the discussion items and that nothing prevents board members from making motions. I guess my curiosity is this type of action within the board's purview? I ask these types of questions sort of, I think, regularly, largely because despite being almost 2 years in. I'm still a newbie in many ways. But I'm wondering, perhaps, I don't know if this is a legal question, Michael, are you the person to ask? I think that we are, I want to make sure that we're in our lane, that's all.
Okay. Michael Blade, did you want to address that?
Yes, I think you can do that. You can be in this lane. I would caution the board to remember the board's role, which is to, to sort of the 35,000 foot level govern the college. They generally, give over to the president and the president's designees, which end up being administration, to do the in the weeds work. And I just want to make sure that you all are thinking about that when you're thinking about what you're asking. I think Holly's motion was fantastic, actually. If we're going to approve this change in model and have some sort of data review in a year to see how it's working, I think that is completely on the the board level of where the board should be. So yes.
And I have Matt and then Rosie.
Yeah, I mean, without even having the conversation teed up, I was going to mention the 3 board policies that I referenced earlier. Board policy 220. At the direction of the board, the president shall study budget needs and prepare recommendations on programs and services for budget committee consideration. The board shall request that the president, I'm not remembering this correctly, but the president shall inform the board of all contracted hiring and dismissals. That's board policy 220. Board policy 030, it's in our lane, no pun intended, to approve major substantive changes in mission, policies, and programs. Board policy 312, to assure fiscal health and stability and represent the public interest. Board policy 510, approve an academic and administrative structure. And there have been times in my 2 terms of service on this board in which we have, well, it seems like every year we're faced with budget challenges. And in times past, serving in a leadership capacity, the president has come to the chair and vice chair prior to your service, Dr. Hamilton, and had honest and frank conversations with leadership, and we worked collaboratively to try and find win-win solutions. So we wouldn't be presented with something like this without some sort of mechanism, of approval mechanism or information sharing. And one of those programs still thrives to this day because of a public-private hybrid and an early separation incentive that was offered one of the faculty members. That was some 7 years ago or so, but I think I have reservations mostly over the precedent that not approving this would set. That the board needs some buy-in so we can be helpful partners and try and find those win-win solutions when appropriate. So we're not learning at the 11th hour what a business, what was it, Richard, a business initiative, a business intelligence service model is, and seeing on our agenda elimination of a program essentially, or elimination of personnel. So all I'm asking for is, and I know it's,
We have a motion.
Thank you. To speak to the motion, what I suspect, part of the chief ingredients of, I don't want to speak for you, Holly, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I suspect by us passing this tonight, we send a message that we just want to have some information shared with us. And so on the back end, let's bring the community together and see if this proposal is indeed working. Thank you.
Rosie? and Rosie, like Angela is, did you want to speak again? Okay, thank you. Rosie.
Thank you. First of all, I'm delighted to see this proposal, having served on this board for 10 years and attempted to secure the kind of real-time decision-making data that will result from this shift. I can tell you that I welcome this evolution of the college's program. I find this conversation somewhat troubling, and it's for the reason that our legal counsel articulated. I find that every aspect of this proposed shift is compliant with every policy that board member Matt Keating articulated. We've been informed, we've been provided with the rationale. In my humble opinion, we have a responsibility to set policy guidance for the institution, but to not dive into individual employment questions, decisions. We have received repeated incoming from administration about this proposed change and evolution in the program. This is not the elimination of a program, it's the evolution of an existing college research service program. And I believe we should provide support. If we expect administration to make good recommendations to us and not expect to be second guessed, we need to invest some faith that the best professional advice is being brought forward and we should embrace it. I'm troubled at the idea that this board would dive deeper into this discussion than that.
Okay, so I would like to clarify that we're not discussing any individual personnel issues. We're looking at a service model, and we do have a motion, and I can try to reiterate that. And Rosie, did you want to speak again? Okay. So we have a motion to actually support this idea and of the proposed service change with the recommendation that we would have a review with stakeholder feedback in 1 year. And so if there's no one else who would like to speak to that motion, I am going to ask Donna, Chelsea, and then Mike.
I can just, thank you. And I think that, I think you summed it up well, Lisa, that, I mean, the motion that's on the floor currently is in support of a service change. And, what I heard from Michael Blade this evening was that the way that this is worded is totally within our purview. And so I'm comfortable supporting this motion this evening.
So, Mike.
I would just like to say that as I heard Board Member Keating articulate the board policies, I also did not hear anything in those board policies that would invite this board to, this is a management decision. And I think that it's totally, the proposal's totally in compliance with existing board policies. I will vote yes on the motion.
Okay. Seeing no additional hands, digital or Matt.
To be clear, Mike, I will be too. I will be too. And I hope that my comments are not inferred as contrary to the motion the board member Johnson promoted. I just want to make clear that the precedent should be a mutual sharing of information And so to have it on the agenda without some action is concerning. So I hear you, Board Member Pryor, but to be clear, that I'm advocating alongside Board Member Johnson's. I'm advocating for Board Member Johnson's motion.
All right.
Call the question.
I was just going to do that. So, are you, Rosie, would you be okay not making that? And I can just move us forward, because otherwise we're going to have to vote on calling the question.
I would be very happy with that.
Okay, great. I'm going to move us forward and let Donna call the roll. Thanks.
Can I clarify the motion? Can I reread it and then?
Yes.
Be sure. Thank you. So motion to adopt the proposed faculty research service model change in planning institutional effectiveness with a recommendation for review in 1 year with stakeholder feedback.
I see that Holly is shaking her head. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Great. Okay. Holly Johnson.
Aye.
Angela Van Kraus.
Aye.
Mike Eister.
I changed my mind. I'm going to vote no.
Matt Keating.
Aye.
Chelsea Jennings.
Aye.
Rosie Pryor.
No.
Lisa Fragola.
Aye. So that motion passes. And Holly, I think that was your first motion as an LCC board member. So that finishes all of our discussion items. Richard, thank you very much for that information.
Thank you, ma'am.
And I will move us on to our reports from student government, followed by the LCC Education Federation. Sorry. Amber?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Amber Coleman. I am the student body president here at Lane Community College. My pronouns are she, her, hers. So the SGA is currently in the applications phase of the SGA elections process. Application phase was extended this voting period to April 23rd. Campaigning will be beginning on May 3rd, ending May 24th. Voting is going to be opening May 26th through May 28th, and then the election results will be announced on June 1st. Our Governing Documents Committee has been meeting weekly to update our bylaws and constitution to address new challenges that have arose this year for the student government. The Governing Documents Committee has finished all of its work on the Constitution and bylaws, and it's just waiting for a vote to the Senate, and then hopefully we'll go on to the student body for a vote. We are also doing a virtual meal raffle for LCC students. This virtual raffle is free of charge. Students enter themselves online. Winners will be drawn and gift cards will be given to the winners. And then we're doing this in efforts to collect data sets on what best methods of contacting students and engaging students are. We've gotten some really good feedback so far, so I'm really excited about that project. We're also creating some promotional videos for the student government to go out to work with elections, but also just to continue in promoting student government in future years and getting them onto our websites and sharing them with instructors to go out to students during all of our virtual classes and stuff, since we can't be out there meeting and doing class wraps in person. The SGA is also working on creating an online site for students to buy, sell, and trade books amongst themselves. And we're just going to be hosting that and then letting students have a space to be able to buy, sell, and trade books and hopefully save a little bit of money in the process. All right, that is all the student government has for this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amber. And I'm not sure that I see Frankie Kokenor in the participants, maybe in the attendees. No. Do we have someone else who is providing a report tonight from LCCEF? Does anybody know?
No, not that I know of. I haven't heard anything.
Okay. All right, if we hear anything, we can come back to that. I'm going to move on to LCCEA, Adrian Mitchell.
Thank you. I'm going to be speaking on a few topics. The first one is labor relations. I'm happy to report a recent grievance resolution. A group of part-time faculty members had been hired to do instructional work without being classified correctly as faculty, which resulted in their employment at LCC outside of both bargaining units, an incorrect rate of compensation, and lack of access to associated contractual benefits. This grievance was resolved with retroactive categorization as faculty, appropriate salary schedule placement, compensation, and benefits according to the contract. In terms of contracted faculty positions, we're still working on finalizing the calculations for how many full-time faculty there will be next year after several searches were opened last December as part of a grievance resolution, but most are not yet complete. Going forward, we'd like to address the timing and length of search processes to avoid delays and short timelines, which impact our ability to recruit a diverse pool of applicants. And we look forward to collaborating with HR and the Office of Equity and Inclusion on our mutual goal of recruiting faculty of color. LCCEA members have been engaged in a significant amount of legislative advocacy. We have faculty representatives who registered to provide testimony at the Ways and Means hearings this month to both support the request for $702 million for the Community College Support Fund and to highlight LCC's career technical programs. In addition, we have members who have provided testimony on bills to support healthcare for part-time faculty statewide and other bills that promote social justice and equity, including one that will improve working conditions and rights for farm workers by eliminating the discriminatory practice of excluding farm workers and agricultural workers from overtime compensation requirements. I will follow up and send you a link to this report. In addition, I would like to highlight faculty work with regard to our inclusive teaching series. The Faculty Professional Development Coordinator, Erin Bartley, with support from a grant from OEA, has offered more than 20 events on inclusive teaching for faculty over the past year and a half. These events include workshops on inclusive syllabi, neurodiversity and universal design, welcoming students of all genders, culturally sustaining pedagogy, and equity as praxis, as well as student panels and a number of faculty chat events, including an introduction to inclusive teaching, teaching after the election, and increasing student engagement on Zoom, among others. Through the support of our membership, LCCEA will support ongoing continuation of this program going forward. And last, I would like to congratulate the LCC student newspaper, The Torch, which won a statewide OEA News Media Award. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. And whoops, I went down too far. So I believe our college council report is our written report. And that takes us on to information report. So I'm going to check again and see. I'm not seeing Frankie here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move us on. Are there any questions about information reports? I see Mike, and let me just see is there anyone else who wants to be put in the queue right now? Okay, we'll just start with Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
So Lisa, I've been participating in a group called the Lane Economic Committee. And I just wanted to report that we met on May 12th or April 12th, and Robert Killen did a great job of outlining the services of SBDC.
Okay, great. I did see some communication about that. Thank you. So are there any questions about the information reports in section 6? Angela?
Yeah, thank you. I asked a question in advance about 6B, the advisory committee list, and Paul provided a really comprehensive answer. I don't know if it makes sense for me to read it here, but I wondered, Paul, if you might sort of speak to that.
Yeah, certainly. Actually, Grant Matthews, our AVP for Technical Education Workforce Development, wrote that for you. So, Grant, if you're around, if there's anything you want to address or elaborate on.
I don't have it specifically in front of me. Angela, could you remind me of which question that was?
I was asking about just the list is very long and I'm not really sure how to do my due diligence with it. And so I was wondering about, are these committees really stable? Do we have a lot of new members each year? Is it reasonable to ask for some sort of summary of bios or selection process, that sort of thing? And the response includes a detailed discussion of a 3-step plan for advisory committee work, data and accountability, developing guidelines and training. So I wondered if you might sort of speak to that in this setting, in addition to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at our advisory committees, there's a lot of variation across advisory committees as far as participation and activity levels and other things, also in the number of members in those advisory committees. So some tend to be extremely stable, while others do have quite a bit of movement throughout. When you ask about, your due diligence in that, we have 36 active advisory committees with about 600 members on them. And so looking at bios and other things, typically it's up to the boards the advisory committees themselves to vet members and take a look and make those recommendations. And so this report tends to be a recommendation of members that have been participating or recommended by their advisory committees themselves to participate and help. As far as activity that we've been doing, we've been working to really increase the accountability around our advisory committees. So that includes implementing some software and other tools to be able to understand our membership better. This report that you received is one of our first reports out of a newly implemented software in that area. And based on some of your questions, I've already made some updates to it to be a little bit more responsive to your questions. So the next round will be a little easier to read, I'm sure. But some of the things that we're looking at are first of all, increasing our accountability about understanding our membership and where we are with members, and then working towards refining and updating our own bylaws and recommendations and guidance around advisory committee participation and expectations. And then after that, we'll be providing assistance out of my office to individual advisory committees on how to improve their membership, diversify their membership, improve their meetings, gain more participation from community or industry members, and so forth. And so we're going through those kind of 3 steps to work over the next several years to really increase the activity and effectiveness of those advisory committees.
And we also, too, in areas where we have programs of study that we align with in high schools and things like that, we really do our best to try to leverage committees, advisory committees across those areas, so that we are all aligned, and we try to make sure that we create as uniform of an experience as we can as those students progress through that. So there's a lot of work going on to align some of those advisory committees as well.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the exciting things that we're doing in partnership with Lane ESD, is implementing some regional advisory committees with them in conjunction with Lane ESD.
Okay, I saw Mike's hand.
I realize I may be getting dangerously close to micromanagement. And so and I also realize I'm only one board member, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the full board. But when I hear about untrained groups selecting people, I am concerned that without training, the inclination, I guess I'm just saying training and selection is important. The college would never think of doing a selection process, I think, without ensuring that the people who are recommending the selections had gone through a training process about how to do that in a welcoming and an inclusive way.
Marge?
Absolutely good point, Mike. We're going to do DEI training. We're going to, when Grant says a deep dive, he means totally deep. We're looking at it through a lot of different lenses. And the committee isn't going to choose their own, but the committee is the best resource to tell us, like if it's in the advanced tech, the types of people we need on those, do we need employers in this industry or that? So we're going to use them, but I think they are advising us, the college, so we will have a heavy hand in it. And I'm 100% confident that Grant is going to have a very nice package to show you next time around.
So any other questions on information reports? Okay, I'm going to move us on to closing items. And first item in that section is board reports. Do we have any board reports from our community or other type of liaison groups? Rosie.
I have two things. One is to update the Board of Education that the Foundation Board has adopted an updated strategic plan, and the Board of Education's subcommittee focused on the foundation and the potential for expanding institutional development at Lane Community College is looking at that, and will bring that forward at the appropriate time. The second thing I want to share with my colleagues is that I have learned that the Eugene Rotary Club, which is the organization that's been providing volunteers to run the vaccination clinics for the county at the fairgrounds and Autzen Stadium and LCC and some other smaller locations, is in urgent need of volunteers. They need somewhere between 30 and 100 volunteers per weekend, and their club can just no longer keep up. So I wanted to share this information with all of you and with anyone who may be watching. They're wondering if there are other service clubs or other organizations locally that might be willing to step up and work together with the Rotary volunteers to staff these clinics. If you're going to be a volunteer, you have to get an online background check done at a cost of $10, and it takes somewhere between 24 and 48 hours to get these background checks completed. They're willing to pay for the background checks if interested volunteers don't have the resources to do it themselves. I have a name, an email address, a telephone number for the lead person at Eugene Rotary. And I'd like to be able to provide that to the college and ask if we could put this request for volunteers front and center on our web page, and ask each of you if you have other opportunities to promote this information. I'll send it to all of you offline after this meeting, but I hope we'll take the opportunity to promote this need for volunteers as broadly as we can. Matt, maybe the city of Eugene can put it front and center on their website, that kind of thing. So if you have access to groups of people, I hope you'll push this information along. They're doing an amazing job of getting those vaccines out, but it sounds like the Rotary Club members are getting winded. So thanks.
Thank you, Rosie. Holly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm feeling like I may have missed my opportunity for informational reports under E, Human Resources. So I'm wondering if I could go back.
We can go back if you have a question.
I do have a question, and thank you, Mr. Turner, for your report. But I can't go without noticing the numbers in the African American employee ethnicity rates, and I'm just wondering, and even the Pacific Islander rates that are noticeably low at Lane Community College as far as personnel. If there are any measures being taken or underway in the works at all for recruitment and retention, or really recruitment at this point, to increase those numbers. In my review of the documents prior to the meeting earlier today, it just really stung me. The numbers and the percentages of Black or African American staff at LCC. And so just asking for some input here, whoever can offer it, if anything is being addressed about those numbers and if we are working towards increasing those numbers. Thank you.
Shane, did you want to take that question?
Yes, please. Thank you for the question, Board Member Johnson. It is, it's the heart and soul of our work right now. We have a college-wide objective that my team and I have been working on to increase the successful recruitment and retention of people of color. And we are embarking on a start to finish review and modification of our recruiting process. That starts with where we advertise. We've centralized the funds for recruitment advertising. Historically, that's been left up to departments, and we've got departments that have been haves or have-nots. And so by centralizing that funding, we're able to make those selections at the front end and realize some economies of scale so that we're hitting the publications where folks may be more likely to be found in those groups. But beyond that, we're looking at every step in the recruiting funnel and looking at what things we do that create barriers. And that may be the way that we write the job description or the position announcement. It may be the signals we send in terms of how we prioritize diversity experience in the minimum qualifications. It may be the way that we sort of redefine what we think about when we think about minimum qualifications. There's a lot of good research that shows that people from diverse backgrounds often don't come into the positions in the traditional way or the way that we've come to think about the required education or experience. So we're looking at that process at every step of the funnel, and we're enlisting the help of campus. We'll be hosting a town hall in May to share some of the ideas that we've come up with and solicit additional ideas from campus on ways that we can improve those outcomes. There's some specialized things that we're doing dependent upon the employee groups. For instance, Adrian mentioned earlier about the work on diversifying the faculty. One of the things that we're talking about in early stages is a diversity fellowship program that would provide teaching experience for sort of early graduates who maybe haven't had the experience or opportunity to gain that teaching experience and then make them more competitive for our openings. We're going to be talking with a search consultant who specializes in diversity recruiting on Monday for our Vice President for Finance and Operations position to help us recruit a more diverse pool. And so we're going to be trying a lot of different things, and we're going to be measuring the results of those and tweaking them and hopefully coming back to you and reporting on the successes that we've had.
Thank you. That's awesome. I'm just wondering, and thank you for giving me the space to ask if any of these efforts include persons of color in your recruitment stages. I understand that asking for advice from persons who are involved in equity work to give input, but I'm wondering if that input is coming directly from the community in which the applicants are applying to work in, and if you all are extending the invitation for people who live in the community, who have experience living in the community, which will add to the retention of folks coming into this community. But thank you for all of your efforts. I just hope that in the recruitment and retention phases of this type of work, that you are actually including persons of diverse backgrounds, which is going to be key in retaining our staff. And it's not to say that applicants or prospective applicants are not qualified to apply for the position, but it goes so much further than that. They know the history, right, of coming to this community, as we all have before we came here. There's a fine area in there in the recruitment process where they need to be connected with folks who can speak highly of the community that they are coming to. And so I'm hoping that you're including community members and people who reside here, people who have lived here, people who were born and raised here, transplant, who have come into this community, and in those town hall conversations, having someone such as myself, who is a transplant, but decided to stay longer than the 3 years, which is kind of average. After 3, if you can make it 3 years here in Eugene, Oregon, you came here for a job or for family or for whatever, then I find that you've made it over the hump. I can raise my hand to that. Like I'll never make it. And here I am 15 years later. So that connectivity is going to be so important in the recruitment and the increase in these numbers. And so if I can just add that, thank you. Thank you.
Holly, I really appreciate that suggestion, and we've been looking at working with affinity groups on campus, the folks that we already have, and hearing their specific concerns and needs for recruiting. But I love the idea of tapping into the community as well, and we'll maybe talk to you offline about ideas you have about doing that.
Thank you. I'll be available.
Thanks.
Okay, so we'll go back to closing items. Are there any other board reports? I would just like to say that I don't have an Lane County of Governments report, LCOG. We're meeting Thursday, and so I should have a report at the next board meeting. And I did see Matt's hand, and I'll wait to give the OCCA board report before we have any other board reports. Matt?
Is this a full closing or just a report on our work?
This is board reports, like the different,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a good time to mention KLCC and the
Yes, that's the right time.
swanky new sweatshirt I got just in time for summer. You too can make a healthy contribution to KLCC at klcc.org. I'm pleased to announce that the latest drive was a success, but the foundation's ramping up efforts as well, and there are openings as we speak. If you'd like to learn more, go to klcc.org. But if you know anyone in the community, especially if there's a veteran, a person of color, a woman, if there's someone who you can think of who would be public service material for a quality public radio station, your favorite and mine too, please send them to klcc.org and have them click on the foundation link.
Okay, thank you for that. So not seeing any other hands, I'm going to go on to the OCCA board report, or Oregon Community Colleges Association. And you'll notice that OCCA has frequent digests. I believe they come out almost weekly. Those are all included for you, as well as the OCCA newsletter. And then I did want to bring up one more topic, which is that after Melanie Munzer stepped down from the board last time in February, I did attend an OCCA meeting that followed her stepping down from the board pretty quickly. And I'm happy to continue doing that until we appoint new community positions at our July retreat or begin to discuss them. I did learn from attending the OCCA meeting that I do need to be appointed by the board. And after talking with Donna, did also realize that what we typically do is we discuss it, we make a decision, it goes into the consent agenda for approval. So I just wanted to discuss that, and I'm happy to attend the May meeting to get us through until we again do the appointment process. Matt?
Well, typically we would do that, but in an emergency vacancy, I would hope that it would be welcome if I made a motion to appoint Lisa Fragola, temporary OCCA liaison.
Second.
Okay, thank you. So did you want to speak to your motion, Matt?
Yes, Lisa rocks. I'm a big fan.
Thanks, Matt. All right, I'm going to see if we can pass this without opposition, with unanimous consent. Is there?
I move unanimous acclaim. Whatever the move is that we make that says we all agree. It's
Great.
I
second it.
Okay, so without opposition.
Yeah.
All right, is there any opposition? Seeing none, we have done unanimous acclaim, as Rosie says. Thank you. I will attend that meeting happily. And then we can figure out those community appointments in July. Are there any ad hoc committee reports? Okay, we can refresh those at our retreat this summer too. Maybe I'll do some checking in with our chairs and our leads on those as well. Anything for the good of the order before we go to adjournment and future meeting dates? Matt?
Okay, there we go. I got 4 quick things. First of all, Donna's Molick is now the appropriate time, Chair Fragola?
Sure.
Or did you want to tee this up?
You may go ahead and discuss the day if you'd like to, if you want to start appreciations.
I do.
Yeah, go for it.
Donna, today is Administrative Professionals Appreciation Day, and this board is a highly functioning board, but we would be dysfunctional without you. Thank you for all you do.
Are welcome, and it is a pleasure working with all of you. I enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Yes, and I would also like to recognize Donna for all of the support she gives me and gets me through, and the service that she gives to this college and this board. Thanks, Donna.
Thank you, Donna. I have more. Yes, I do. Okay. Thank you, Lisa Fragola, for delivering my Holly Johnson lawn sign. If anyone is within earshot, please be sure you vote this May. And Holly, I look forward to continuing service with you for the next 2.5 months. We passed a resolution in support of Senate Bill 554 tonight without much fanfare, but I'm asking colleagues to contact your lawmakers, like tomorrow. Contact your lawmakers and use this resolution as a template to say thank you for standing for the safety of our schools, our public buildings, and our workplaces in support of this pro-public safety, pro-local jurisdiction legislation. If you need a copy, I can send it to you, but it's obviously in your board docs and it's in your packet. In particular, if State Senator James Manning is, if you're a constituent of Senator Manning, please give Senator Manning kudos and thanks. Same with Senator Przonski, but it's now in front of the House. So contact your state representatives, please, and let them know that we passed this tonight unanimously, and how important it is that the House support Senate Bill 554 as well. And finally, Chair Fragola, yesterday a a murderer, a former police officer, was found guilty on 3 accounts. And the world watched as justice hung in the balance. And our nation, though we witnessed accountability yesterday, still grapples with race and vital police reform. Well, George Floyd's life was squeezed from him without mercy for 9 minutes and 29 seconds in broad daylight on a fateful May Day in Minneapolis. I ask Chair Fragola, I ask for 9 seconds and 9.29, 9.5 seconds of silence for us to remember, please, and mourn the loss of a Black man, a father, and a human being who did not need to die on that memorable May Day.
So we'll take a moment of silence in memory of George Floyd.
Thank you.
Thank you for recognizing that, Matt. Are there any other items before we adjourn? I will call our attention to our future meeting dates, and we do have a busy May. Just a reminder to the board that we don't just have our work sessions and our board meeting in May, but that we also have budget meetings. And so just be noting your calendar for those meetings. And I believe Donna reminded us earlier that the next one is on the 5th. We do have several meetings where our start time is at 5 o'clock. So, and if there is nothing, oh, Mike, okay.
For some reason, I have 3 o'clock on my calendar for that May 5th meeting. Is that correct, or do we know the time?
No, it should be 5 o'clock.
All right, thank you.
So May 5th at 5. 5. Okay, I am going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
All right.